They say the mate bond is the moon goddess's greatest gift, an unbreakable thread that binds two souls across time, distance, and fate itself. But what happens when that thread is severed by the one person destined to cherish it? What happens when an alpha king looks into the eyes of his fated mate and chooses pride over destiny? My name is Ember Ashford, and I was born an Omega in the Crimson Veil Pack, the lowest rank, invisible, disposable. I spent my life in the shadows, serving those who would never see me as anything more than a servant. Until the night of the Harvest Moon Gala. Until I felt the mate bond snap into place, connecting me to the most powerful wolf in all the territories, Alpha King Thorne Ironwood. For one perfect, breathless moment, I thought my life was about to change. I thought I would finally matter. I was wrong. He rejected me in front of everyone, hundreds of witnesses to my humiliation. He chose another, a rival pack's daughter, someone worthy of standing beside a king. And then he did something worse than rejection. He accused me of treason and sentenced me to death in the Frostlands, a frozen wasteland where no wolf has ever survived. But here's what Alpha King Thorne Ironwood doesn't know. I survived. I'm not the fragile Omega he threw away. And the secrets I carry in my womb will shake the foundation of every pack in the Northern Kingdoms. This is the story of how I died. And how I was reborn as something far more dangerous than a rejected mate. This is the story of the Omega's reckoning. Chapter 1. The Gala of Broken Dreams. The Ironwood Citadel blazed with light. Thousands of candles flickered in crystal chandeliers, casting dancing shadows across polished granite floors. The great hall thrummed with music, laughter, and the scent of roasted meats and spiced wine. Wolves from every corner of the Northern Kingdoms had gathered for the Harvest Moon Gala, the most prestigious event of the year. It was a night of politics disguised as celebration. Alliances forged over goblets of wine. Rivalries simmering beneath polite smiles. Power plays wrapped in silk and jewels. And somewhere in the midst of it all, pressed against the far wall like a shadow no one wanted to acknowledge, stood Ember Ashford. She didn't belong here. Omegas from the Crimson Veil Pack weren't meant for galas. They were meant for kitchens, for scrubbing floors, for keeping their heads down and their mouths shut. Ember had spent 22 years learning that lesson, carved into her bones by 1,000 small cruelties. The dress she wore had been borrowed from Clara, a beta servant who'd taken pity on her. It was simple linen dyed a pale blue, already fraying at the sleeves. Around her, noble she-wolves glittered in silk and velvet, their throats dripping with gold and gemstones. Ember clutched the fabric of her skirt and wished she could disappear entirely. Her hair, copper red with streaks of white that marked her as different, as other, had been braided down her back. She tried to make herself presentable, but there was no hiding what she was. Her scent alone gave her away. Sweet and subtle, easily overpowered. The scent of an Omega. Why did I come? She whispered to herself, her amber eyes scanning the crowd nervously. Because Clara had insisted. Because deep down, some foolish part of Ember had wanted to see the world beyond the servants' quarters just once. To pretend, even for a single night, that she was more than what her rank dictated. The music swelled, a haunting melody played by the Royal Orchestra. Couples moved onto the dance floor, their movements graceful and practiced. And then the energy in the room shifted. Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned toward the grand entrance. Even the music seemed to quiet, as if the instruments themselves were bowing in reverence. Alpha King Thorne Ironwood had arrived. Ember's breath caught in her throat. She'd never seen him in person before. No Omega ever got close enough to the Alpha King to glimpse more than a shadow passing through corridors. But now, standing at the top of the marble staircase, he was impossible to ignore. 6'7", shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of kingdoms. His hair was dark as a raven's wing, falling just past his collar. But it was his eyes that stole the breath from every wolf in the room, eyes like molten amber, glowing faintly with the presence of his wolf. He wore black formal attire that emphasized every hard line of muscle, every inch of predatory grace. A silver chain hung around his neck, the ancient symbol of his bloodline gleaming against his chest. Power rolled off him in waves. Dominance. Authority. Control. The crowd parted as he descended the stairs, wolves bowing and lowering their gazes in submission. Even the strongest alphas in the room couldn't hold his stare for long. Ember should have looked away. She knew better than to meet an alpha's eyes, especially his eyes. But something held her frozen. Some invisible force she couldn't name. And then it happened. The mate bond slammed into her with the force of a lightning strike. Ember gasped, her hand flying to her chest. A golden thread of pure energy surged through her veins, wrapping around her heart, her soul, connecting her to him across the crowded ballroom. Her wolf, quiet and timid her entire life, suddenly roared to life inside her mind. Mate, mate, mate. The word echoed through her consciousness, drowning out the music, the voices, the clink of glasses. Every nerve in her body ignited. Every cell screamed recognition. Her knees buckled, and she grabbed the wall behind her to stay upright. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. But the bond pulsed between them, undeniable and ancient. The moon goddess herself had woven this connection, choosing them for each other before they'd ever drawn breath. Ember's heart hammered so violently she thought it might burst from her chest. And then, across the vast expanse of the ballroom, his eyes found hers. For one perfect, suspended heartbeat, the world stopped. Thorne's body went rigid. His nostrils flared as her scent hit him, cutting through hundreds of other wolves to reach him like a beacon. His amber eyes widened, and Ember saw it recognition. His wolf surged forward, barely contained beneath his skin. He felt it too. The bond snapped taut between them, shimmering in the air like heat rising from summer stones. Ember's lips parted. Tears pricked her eyes. This was the moment every wolf dreamed of. The miracle her grandmother had whispered about by firelight. The moon goddess's greatest blessing. My mate, she thought, wonder and terror warring in her chest. The Alpha King is my mate. But then his expression changed. Confusion flickered first, as if he couldn't believe what his wolf was telling him. Then shock rippled across his features, his jaw tightening. And finally disgust. Ember's breath hitched. No. No, that couldn't be right. But Thorne was already moving. Long, predatory strides carried him across the ballroom floor. The crowd parted instantly, sensing the storm brewing in their king. Conversations died. Dancing stopped. Every eye in the citadel turned to watch. He was coming for her. Ember's pulse roared in her ears. Her trembling fingers tightened on her skirt. Was he going to claim her? Was he going to announce their bond in front of everyone? Hope and fear tangled inside her until she couldn't tell them apart. Thorne stopped directly in front of her, towering over her small frame. His scent crashed over her, pine smoke and winter rain, so overwhelming she thought she might faint. The bond thrummed between them, alive and desperate. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Thorne's voice cut through the silence like a blade, cold, sharp, and final. You. The single word carried the weight of condemnation. Ember flinched. My king, don't. His hand sliced through the air between them. Don't speak to me. Humiliation scorched through her veins. The entire hall watched. She could feel the weight of hundreds of stares pressing against her skin. Judgment, pity, amusement. Her wolf whimpered, confused and wounded. Before she could retreat, a figure glided to Thorne's side. Ember's stomach dropped. Lady Morgana Silverclaw. She was everything Ember wasn't: tall, elegant, powerful. The daughter of the Silverclaw Pax Alpha, one of the wealthiest and most influential families in the kingdoms. Her raven-black hair cascaded down her back in perfect waves. Her emerald gown hugged every curve. Sapphires glittered at her throat, and her green eyes gleamed with triumph as she placed one possessive hand on Thorne's arm. Surely, there's been some mistake, Morgana purred, her voice dripping with false concern. This Omega cannot possibly be your mate, my king. Ember's chest clenched. Her wolf snarled weakly, but what could she do? She was nothing compared to this woman. Thorne's jaw worked. His amber eyes never left Ember's face, and she saw the battle raging behind them, his wolf fighting against his human logic. Then his lips curled, and her world shattered. "There is no mistake," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "But there is a choice." Ember's heart stopped. Alpha King Thorne Ironwood." He paused, his gaze boring into her. "What is your name, Omega?" Her lips trembled. Tears blurred her vision. Ember Ashford." Alpha King Thorne Ironwood, reject you, Ember Ashford, as my mate and as Queen of the Northern Kingdoms." The words tore through her like claws. The bond didn't simply break. It ripped. White-hot agony exploded in her chest, stealing the air from her lungs. She collapsed to her knees, gasping, clawing at the polished floor as the mate bond unraveled thread by thread. Her wolf howled inside her mind, a keening cry of grief so raw and primal that Ember thought she might go mad. Around her, whispers rose like poisonous smoke. "An Omega? Poor thing. Thank the goddess it wasn't me. How humiliating." Ember couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The pain consumed everything, burning through her veins like molten silver. "I choose Lady Morgana Silverclaw as my queen instead," Thorne continued coldly, already turning away from her broken form. "Accept the rejection, Omega, or I'll have you removed from my territory." Through the shards of her shattered soul, Ember forced the words out. I accept." The moment the words left her lips, the bond severed completely. Silence. Emptiness. Ashes where fire had once burned. Ember crumpled forward, her forehead touching the cold floor. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she made no sound. She had nothing left to give. The crowd was already moving on. The music resumed. Laughter returned as if nothing had happened, as if she didn't exist at all. But as Ember knelt there, drowning in agony, she didn't see the flicker of doubt that crossed Thorne's face. Didn't see the way his hand twitched, as if reaching for her before he clenched it into a fist. And she didn't see Lady Morgana's smile, cold, calculating, and victorious, as she leaned close to the Alpha King and whispered something only he could hear. Far above the citadel, hidden in the shadows of a tower window, two figures watched the scene unfold. Both wore dark cloaks. Both had eyes that glowed faintly with magic. "It is done," one whispered. "The king believes the vision we planted," the other replied. "He sees only the destruction the Omega would bring. And Lady Morgana? She will have her crown, and we will have our payment." The witches smiled, and the moonlight seemed to dim. Chapter 2: The Accusation. Ember didn't remember how she made it back to the servants' quarters. Her body moved on instinct, one foot in front of the other, while her mind remained shattered in the ballroom. The rejection wound throbbed in her chest like an open sore, each heartbeat sending fresh waves of agony through her veins. The bond was gone. That beautiful, terrible thread that had connected her to Thorne Ironwood for mere minutes had been severed, leaving behind nothing but emptiness. Her wolf lay curled in the back of her mind, whimpering. Silent. Broken. The servants' wing was quiet when she stumbled through the door. Most of the staff were still working the gala, serving nobles who laughed and danced while Ember's world had ended. She collapsed onto her narrow cot, little more than a straw mattress and a thin blanket, and curled into herself. The room was cold. The stone walls offered no comfort. But Ember barely noticed. All she could see was Thorne's face, the disgust in his amber eyes, the way he turned away from her as if she were nothing. Chosen Lady Morgana instead. Fresh tears soaked into her pillow. Ember pressed her fist against her mouth to muffle the sobs that tore from her throat. She couldn't let anyone hear. Weakness was dangerous for an Omega. It invited cruelty. Hours passed, maybe days. Time lost all meaning. She didn't eat. I didn't sleep. Just lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the phantom ache where the bond had been. Why? Her wolf whispered weakly. Why would the moon goddess do this to us? Ember had no answer. On the third morning after the rejection, Clara came to check on her. The beta servant gasped when she saw Ember's condition, hollow-eyed, pale, trembling. Goddess above Ember. You need to eat something. I'm fine, Ember whispered, though her voice was hoarse from crying. You're not fine. Clara sat on the edge of the cot, pressing a hand to Ember's forehead. You're burning up. The rejection wound will heal, Ember finished weakly. Eventually, that was the lie they told Omegas. That rejection wounds healed. But Ember could feel the truth in her bones. Some wounds never closed. They just learned to bleed quietly. Clara's eyes filled with sympathy. I'm so sorry. What he did to you, it wasn't right. He's the Alpha King, Ember said flatly. He can do whatever he wants. That doesn't make it right. Ember closed her eyes. Right or wrong didn't matter. The deed was done. Clara stayed with her for a while, trying to coax her into eating bread and broth. Ember managed a few bites to satisfy her friend, but the food tasted like ash. When Clara finally left for her duties, Ember forced herself to sit up. She couldn't stay in this bed forever. The servants' quarters weren't a place of rest. If she didn't work, she didn't eat. And despite everything, some stubborn part of her refused to simply waste away. Survive, her wolf whispered. We survive. So Ember rose on shaking legs, splashed cold water on her face, and braided her copper-red hair with trembling fingers. She would return to her duties. She would scrub floors and serve nobles and fade back into invisibility. It was all she'd ever known anyway. But fate, it seemed, wasn't finished with her yet. Ember was scrubbing the marble steps leading to the throne room when the scream echoed through the corridors. She froze, her brush dripping soapy water onto the stone. The sound came again, high-pitched, panicked. A maid's voice. Moments later, the thunder of boots shook the floor. Royal guards sprinted past her, their faces grim. Ember pressed herself against the wall, making herself as small as possible. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. You there, Omega. Ember's blood turned to ice. She looked up to find the captain of the guards standing over her, a massive wolf named Garrett with a scar across his jaw and eyes like flint. Emmy, she stammered. On your feet. Now. Ember scrambled upright, her heart hammering. I haven't done anything. Save your breath. Garrett's hand clamped around her arm like an iron vice. You're coming with us. Wait, please, what's happening? I don't understand. But Garrett was already dragging her forward. Two more guards flanked her, their expressions cold and merciless. Terror clawed up Ember's throat. What is this? What did I do? They hauled her through the citadel's winding corridors. Nobles stopped to stare, their faces twisting with curiosity and disdain. Whispers followed in Ember's wake like carrion birds. That's the Omega. The rejected one. What could she have done now? Finally, they reached the throne room. The great doors swung open with a groan, and Ember was shoved inside. The room was packed. Nobles lined the walls, their jewelry glittering in the torchlight. Advisors stood in clusters, murmuring urgently. At the center of it all, displayed on a velvet cushion like a crown jewel, sat a necklace. Ember's breath caught. Even from a distance, she could feel the power radiating from it. The pendant was carved from moonstone, pale and luminous, pulsing with ancient magic. Silver filigree wrapped around the stone in delicate patterns. The Queen's Moonstone. Ember had heard stories about it. An heirloom passed down through generations of Ironwood queens, said to have been blessed by the moon goddess herself. It was priceless, sacred, and apparently missing. Garrett forced Ember to her knees before the throne. Your Majesty, he said, bowing. We found it hidden in her quarters. Gasps rippled through the court like a wave. Ember's head snapped up. What? No. That's impossible. I've never even seen that necklace before. Silence. Garrett barked. Ember's gaze flew to the throne, and her heart plummeted. Thorne sat rigidly in the high-backed chair, his amber eyes fixed on her. His jaw was clenched tight, his knuckles white where they gripped the armrests. Beside him, Draped elegantly over the arm of the throne like a queen already was Lady Morgana. Her emerald gown shimmered in the firelight. Her expression was demure, concerned, but Ember saw the faint curve of satisfaction at the corners of her mouth. "Your Majesty," Ember pleaded, her voice breaking.
"Please. I didn't take it."
"I swear on the moon goddess herself. Someone must have planted it in my room. I would never." "Enough." Thorne's voice cracked like thunder, silencing her instantly. For a moment, Ember thought she saw something flicker across his face. Hesitation.
Doubt.
His wolf stirred restlessly beneath his skin, and the phantom echo of their severed bond seemed to pulse in the air between them. But then Morgana leaned closer, her voice a velvet whisper that somehow still carried through the silent hall. "You see how desperate she is, my king? An Omega thief trying to save herself with lies." The doubt in Thorne's eyes hardened into stone. "You stand accused of theft against the crown," he said coldly, his gaze locked on Ember. "The penalty for such a crime is severe." "I didn't do it." Ember's voice cracked. Tears streamed down her face. "Please, Thorne, my king, you have to believe me. Why would I steal from you? What would I even do with something like that?" "Perhaps you thought to sell it," one of the advisors suggested. "Omegas are known to be cunning when desperate. Or perhaps," another noble added with a sneer, "she sought revenge for her rejection. A rejected mate can become unstable." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the court. Ember's chest tightened. She couldn't breathe. The walls were closing in around her. "I didn't take it," she whispered, but her voice was drowned out by the growing accusations. Thorne rose from his throne, and the room fell silent. He descended the steps slowly, each footfall echoing like a death knell. When he stood before Ember, she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Up close, she could see the conflict raging behind his carefully controlled expression. His wolf was fighting him, she could sense it. The bond might be severed, but some echo remained. Some instinct telling him this wasn't right. "Look at me," he commanded. Ember raised her tear-stained face. For one breathless moment, their eyes locked, and something passed between them. A memory of what could have been. A ghost of the connection they'd shared for those few perfect minutes at the gala. Then Thorne's jaw tightened, and the moment shattered. "For theft against the crown," he said, his voice steady and merciless, "I sentence you to banishment." The throne room erupted. Banishment. Where? She'll never survive. Garrett's cruel smile confirmed Ember's worst fears. "The Frostlands, I presume, your majesty?" Thorne nodded once. "The Frostlands. Effective immediately." Ember's world tilted. The Frostlands. The frozen wasteland at the northern edge of the kingdoms. A place of endless ice and howling winds. No wolf had ever survived banishment there. It was a death sentence disguised as mercy. "No," Ember gasped, her legs giving out beneath her. The guards caught her before she hit the floor. "Please, not the Frostlands. I'll die out there. You know I will." "You should have considered that before you betrayed your king," Thorne said coldly. His words were like daggers, each one finding its mark in her already shattered heart. Ember wanted to scream, to rage, to demand proof, witnesses, anything that would prove her innocence. But what good would it do? She was an Omega, a rejected mate. Nobody. And he was the Alpha King. "Take her away," Thorne ordered, turning his back on her. "I don't want to see her face again." As the guards dragged her from the throne room, Ember caught one last glimpse of Lady Morgana. The woman stood beside Thorne's throne, one hand resting possessively on the back of his chair. And for just a fraction of a second, when their eyes met, Morgana's mask slipped. The smile that curved her lips was cold, calculating, and victorious. Ember's blood ran cold. She did this. The realization hit like a physical blow. Morgana had framed her, had planted the necklace, had whispered poison into Thorne's ear until he saw Ember as nothing but a threat to be eliminated. But there was no proof. No way to fight back. No one who would believe the word of a broken Omega over the future queen. As the throne room doors slammed shut behind her, Ember made herself a promise. If I survive this, if I somehow make it through the Frostlands alive, I will make them all pay. Her wolf stirred weakly in agreement. The guards hauled her toward the northern gates, where a transport vehicle waited. Ember's execution had begun. Chapter 3. Into the Frozen Death. The transport vehicle lurched over frozen ground, each jolt sending fresh pain through Ember's bruised body. She sat in the back, wrists bound with iron shackles that bit into her skin. The metal was cold, so cold it burned. 2 guards sat across from her, their faces impassive, their hands resting on the hilts of their weapons. Through the barred window, Ember watched as the world changed. The lush forests surrounding the Ironwood citadel gradually thinned. Green gave way to brown, then to white. Trees became sparse, twisted things clinging to rocky soil. The air grew colder with each passing mile until Ember's breath misted in front of her face. She pulled her thin servant's dress tighter around herself, but it did nothing against the chill seeping into her bones. The Frostlands. Every wolf knew the stories. The endless tundra at the edge of the known world, where temperatures dropped so low that breath froze in your lungs. Where blizzards could strip flesh from bone in minutes. Where no prey lived, no shelter existed, and death came quickly to those foolish or unlucky enough to venture there. It was where the kingdoms sent their worst criminals, and their unwanted omegas. Ember's wolf whimpered in the back of her mind. Still weak from the rejection wound, she had barely enough strength to keep Ember warm, let alone help her survive what was coming. We're going to die out there, Ember thought numbly. This is how it ends. The guards said nothing for the entire journey. They didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her existence beyond keeping her restrained. She was already dead to them. Hours passed. The landscape grew more desolate. Snow began to fall, first in gentle flakes, then in thick curtains that obscured everything beyond a few feet. Finally, the vehicle shuddered to a halt. One of the guards stood and unlocked the rear door. Frigid wind howled into the compartment, stealing Ember's breath. End of the line, Omega. Rough hands grabbed her arms and dragged her out into the snow. Ember's feet sank immediately into powder up to her knees. The cold was unlike anything she'd ever experienced, a living thing that clawed at her exposed skin, bit through her thin dress, wrapped icy fingers around her throat. She gasped, and the frozen air seared her lungs. Around her stretched an endless expanse of white. No trees, no rocks, no landmarks of any kind. Just snow and ice and wind that screamed like a wounded animal. Please, Ember begged through chattering teeth. At least give me a coat.
Food.
Anything. The guard who dragged her out, a young wolf named Derek, actually hesitated. For a moment, something like pity flickered across his face. Then the senior guard, Garrett, stepped forward and backhanded Derek across the face. Orders are orders, Garrett snarled. The Alpha King wants her to have nothing. Derek's jaw tightened, but he nodded and stepped back. Garrett turned to Ember, his eyes cold. You're lucky the king showed mercy. He could have had you executed in the throne room. This isn't mercy, Ember whispered. This is a slow death. Then die quickly. Garrett turned back toward the vehicle. It'll be Kinder. The engine roared to life. Wheels churned through snow, spraying white powder into Ember's face. And then they were gone. The sound of the vehicle faded into the distance, swallowed by the howling wind. Silence descended. Vast, crushing, absolute. Ember stood alone in the center of an endless frozen wasteland, wearing nothing but a servant's dress and iron shackles. The wind shrieked. Snow stung her face like 1,000 tiny needles. This is it, she thought. This is how I die. Her wolf stirred weakly.
No.
We fight. Fight what? Ember whispered into the wind. There's nothing here. Nothing but ice and death. Then we found something. We survive. We always survive. Ember wanted to argue, wanted to sink into the snow and let the cold take her. It would be easier,
Faster.
less painful than the alternative. But something deep inside her, something stubborn and furious and unbroken, refused to surrender. Thorne had rejected her. Morgana had framed her. They had sentenced her to death and sent her here to freeze alone and forgotten. They want me to die, Ember thought, and anger flickered to life in her chest.
Hot. Fierce.
Strong enough to push back against the cold for just a moment. Then I won't give them the satisfaction. She took a step forward. Her legs shook. Her feet were already numb. But she took another step. And another. I will survive, she whispered through frozen lips. I will survive this. And when I do... She didn't finish the thought. She didn't have the strength. But the promise hung in the air between her and the uncaring sky. The first hour was agony. Ember stumbled through knee-deep snow, the shackles weighing down her arms. The wind battered her from all sides, trying to push her down, to bury her. Her dress was soaked through within minutes. Ice crystals formed in her hair. Her fingers turned white, then blue. She couldn't feel her feet anymore. Keep moving, her wolf urged. If you stop, you die. So Ember kept moving. She had no destination, no goal beyond the next step. The world had narrowed to a simple equation, move or die. The second hour, she fell. Her legs simply gave out, and she collapsed face first into the snow. For a moment, she lay there, the cold wrapping around her like a blanket. So easy, a treacherous voice whispered in her mind.
Just close your eyes.
Let go. No more pain. No more rejection.
No more anything.
Her wolf snarled. Get up. I can't. Ember sobbed into the snow.
Get up.
Ember's fingers clawed at the ice. Slowly, painfully, she dragged herself to her knees. Then to her feet. And she kept walking. The third hour, the landscape began to change. Through the curtain of falling snow, Ember glimpsed dark shapes rising from the white. Rocks. A cliff face carved by ancient glaciers. Hope sparked weakly in her chest.
Shelter.
Maybe. She altered her course, stumbling toward the rocks. Her vision blurred. She didn't know if it was from tears or snow, or the early stages of freezing to death. It didn't matter. All that mattered was reaching those rocks. Her foot caught on something hidden beneath the snow, and she fell again. This time, she slid several feet down an incline before slamming into stone. Pain exploded through her shoulder. But the impact had revealed something. A gap in the cliff face. A dark opening barely visible through the snow.
A cave.
Ember's heart leaped. She crawled toward it on hands and knees, her body screaming in protest. The entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for her to squeeze through. But inside, the wind stopped. Ember collapsed onto the stone floor of the cave, gasping. It was still freezing. The rock was like ice against her skin, but the wind couldn't reach her here. The snow couldn't bury her. For the first time since the guards had abandoned her, she wasn't actively dying. She curled into the smallest ball possible, tucking her frozen hands beneath her arms. Her whole body shook violently with shivers. Made it, she thought distantly. Found shelter. But shelter wasn't enough. She needed warmth.
Food.
Water. She needed a miracle. Ember closed her eyes, too exhausted even to cry anymore. Please, she prayed to the moon goddess who had supposedly chosen Thorne as her mate. Please, if you're real, if you care at all, don't let me die like this. Not alone. Not in the dark. The cave offered no answer. Only silence and cold. But somewhere deep in Ember's chest, beneath the rejection wound and the fear and the exhaustion, a tiny ember of determination still glowed. She had survived the first day. Tomorrow, she will survive the second. And the day after that. And the day after that. For as long as it took. Because Ember Ashford refused to be another forgotten Omega who disappeared into the snow. She would live. And someday, somehow, she would make them all see what they had thrown away. Ember didn't know how long she lay on that frozen stone floor. Time became meaningless in the darkness of the cave. She drifted in and out of consciousness, her body shutting down to conserve what little warmth remained. In her fevered dreams, she saw Thorne's face. Not the cold, disgusted expression from the gala, but something else. The moment their eyes had first met, That single heartbeat when the bond had snapped into place and she'd seen recognition flash across his features. He had felt it too. She was certain of it. So, what has changed? What had turned recognition into rejection so quickly? Morgana, Ember thought, even through the haze of cold and exhaustion.
She did something. Said something.
But what?
And why?
The questions chased each other through her mind until exhaustion finally claimed her completely. When Ember woke, pale light filtered through the cave entrance.
Dawn.
She'd survived the night. The realization hit her with surprising force. She'd actually survived. Her body was stiff, every muscle screaming in protest as she tried to move. Her fingers and toes burned with the warning signs of frostbite. But she was alive. Day 2, her wolf whispered. We made it to day 2. Ember forced herself to sit up, gasping at the pain that lanced through her frozen limbs. She needed to move, needed to get blood flowing before her body shut down completely. She crawled toward the cave entrance and peered out. The blizzard had passed. Weak sunlight filtered through heavy clouds, casting everything in shades of gray and white. The landscape was still brutally empty, just endless snow and ice stretching to the horizon. But something caught her eye. Tracks in the snow.
Small.
Four-legged. Animal tracks. Ember's stomach was cramped with hunger. When had she last eaten? 2 days ago? 3? If there were animals, there was prey. And if there was prey, there was a chance. But first, she needed to deal with the shackles. The iron cuffs had rubbed her wrists raw, and the weight of them made every movement harder. Ember looked around the cave, searching for anything she could use. A sharp rock jutted from the wall near the entrance. It took over an hour of painful, frustrating work, but eventually Ember managed to wedge the chain between the rock and the wall. She pulled with all her remaining strength, ignoring the way the metal cut into her wrists. The chain snapped with a sharp crack that echoed through the cave. Ember fell backward, gasping. The cuffs still circled her wrists, but at least her hands were free now. Small victories, she thought grimly. Next, she needed water. Ember scooped snow into her mouth, letting it melt on her tongue. It was better than nothing, but her body needed more than this to survive. Outside the cave, she followed the animal tracks with her eyes. They led toward a cluster of rocks about 50 yards away. 50 yards might as well have been 50 miles in her condition. But she didn't have a choice. Ember stepped out into the snow and immediately sank to her thighs. Each step was a battle. Her legs shook. Her vision swam. But she kept going. 20 yards. 30. Her foot slipped, and she went down hard, face first into the snow. Get up, her wolf commanded. I'm trying, Ember gasped. Try harder. She clawed her way back to her feet. 40 yards. The rocks were close now. So close. And then she saw it, a flash of white against white. A snow hare, crouched beneath an overhang. Ember froze. She had no weapons. No tools. Just her bare hands and desperation. The hare's ears twitched. Ember lunged. She was too slow. Too weak. The hare bolted, disappearing into the maze of rocks. Ember collapsed into the snow, tears of frustration burning her eyes. I can't do this, she thought. I'm going to starve. No, her wolf snarled. We hunt. We learn. We adapt. Ember lay there for a long moment, breathing hard. Then slowly, painfully, she pushed herself up and started searching the rocks. If prey lived here, there had to be a reason. Shelter. Food sources. Something she could use. And that's when she found it. Hidden behind a jumble of stones, almost invisible unless you were looking for it, a narrow passage leading deeper into the cliff. Ember squeezed through, her heart pounding. The passage opened into a larger chamber, and what she saw there made her gasp. Steam. Rising from a dark pool of water in the center of the chamber. A hot spring. Ember's knees nearly buckled with relief. She stumbled forward and plunged her frozen hands into the water. It was warm, not scalding, but blissfully, impossibly warm. Tears streamed down her face as feeling slowly, painfully returned to her fingers. She drank deeply from the spring, the mineral-rich water tasting better than any wine she'd ever served at the Citadel. And for the first time since her banishment, Ember allowed herself to feel something other than despair.
Hope.
She had shelter. She had water. And if there were hot springs here, there had to be more life than she'd initially thought. She could survive this. She would survive this. Ember stripped off her soaked dress and lowered herself into the warm water, gasping as heat seeped into her frozen body. As she floated there, letting the spring thaw her from the outside in, a new thought took root. The Alpha King had sent her here to die. But Ember Ashford was going to do something far worse than die. She was going to live. And when she was strong enough, when she'd learned to survive in this frozen hell, she would find out the truth behind her rejection. She would discover what Morgana had done. And she would make them both answer for it. The broken, rejected Omega they'd thrown away was dead. What rose from these frozen wastes would be something far more dangerous. Chapter 4. Survival and Secrets. 3 weeks in the Frostlands changed Ember in ways she never could have imagined. The fragile Omega who had collapsed in the snow on that first day was gone, replaced by something harder, sharper, forged in ice and desperation. She had learned to hunt. It started with failures. So many failures. Missed strikes, lost prey, nights spent shivering with an empty stomach. But Ember was nothing if not stubborn, and her wolf, slowly recovering from the rejection wound, lent her whatever strength she could. The first kill came on day 7. A snow hare, just like the one that had escaped her before. This time, Ember was ready. She'd spent hours studying their patterns, learning where they nested when they emerged to feed. She'd fashioned a crude spear from a sharp rock and a branch scavenged from a rare twisted tree. When the hare appeared, Ember struck. The spear found its mark. Ember had cried as she held the warm body, torn between guilt and savage relief. But hunger won as it always did. She'd carried her prize back to the cave and learned to prepare it over a tiny fire she'd coaxed from flint and dried moss. The meat had tasted like victory. After that, hunting became easier. Not easy, nothing about the Frostlands was easy, but possible. She learned to move silently through the snow, to read tracks and weather patterns, to think like prey and strike like a predator. Her wolf grew stronger with each passing day, fed by both meat and purpose. And Ember's body changed too. Constant movement carved away the softness that came from years of kitchen work. Muscles developed in her arms and legs. Her reflexes sharpened. The cold that had nearly killed her became something she could tolerate, even if she couldn't quite ignore it. She found other caves in the cliff network, each offering different advantages. One had a vent that funneled warm air from deep underground. Another opened to the south, catching whatever weak sunlight managed to pierce the clouds. She moved between them strategically, always thinking, always planning. The hot spring became her sanctuary, a place to warm herself, to clean her kills, to simply exist without the constant threat of freezing to death. It was during one of these moments, floating in the warm water after a successful hunt, that Ember first felt it. A flutter. So faint she almost missed it. She pressed her hand to her stomach, frowning. Probably just hunger. Or indigestion from the hare meat. But then it came again. Stronger this time. Unmistakable. Ember's eyes widened.
No.
No, that's not possible. Her hand remained pressed to her abdomen, fingers trembling. She counted backward frantically in her mind. The gala was nearly 4 weeks ago. The rejection had severed the mate bond, but before that, for those few minutes when the connection had blazed between them, oh, moon goddess. Ember's breath came faster. Her wolf stirred, suddenly alert. Life, her wolf whispered. New life. No, Ember said aloud, her voice echoing off the cave walls. This can't be happening. Not here. Not now. But even as denial rose in her throat, she knew the truth. The exhaustion that went beyond normal fatigue. The way certain smells made her nauseous. The strange aches in her body that had nothing to do with hunting or cold. She was pregnant. With Thorne's child. Ember hauled herself out of the hot spring, her mind reeling. She dressed quickly, her hands shaking so badly she could barely fasten the furs she'd stitched together to replace her ruined dress. A baby. She was going to have a baby. Here, in the Frostlands. Alone. Terror crashed over her like an avalanche. How could she possibly survive childbirth in these conditions? She had no healer, no midwife, no one to help her. Just herself and a wolf who had barely recovered from rejection. "We can do this," her wolf insisted. "We're stronger than we've ever been." "Strength doesn't matter if I die in labor," Ember whispered. "Then we make sure that doesn't happen. We prepare. We plan. We survive." Ember sank onto a flat rock, pressing both hands to her still flat stomach. A baby. Thorne's baby. The Alpha King who had rejected her, humiliated her, and sentenced her to death was the father of the child growing inside her. And he would never know. The thought should have brought satisfaction. Revenge, in its own way, for him to lose an heir he didn't even know existed. But instead, Ember felt only a fierce, overwhelming protectiveness. "You're mine," she whispered to the tiny life inside her. "Not his. Never his. He gave up any claim to you when he threw me away." Her wolf rumbled in agreement. "I won't let this place kill you," Ember continued, her voice growing stronger. "I won't let the cold or the hunger or anything else take you from me. You're going to be born. You're going to live. And you're going to be strong." The flutter came again, as if in answer. Ember closed her eyes, a single tear tracking down her cheek. She had thought surviving the Frostlands for herself was hard enough. Now she had to survive for two. The weight of it pressed down on her shoulders, heavy, terrifying, impossible. And yet. "But," her wolf whispered, "now we have a true purpose." Ember opened her eyes, and something shifted inside her. Before, she had survived out of spite, out of stubborn refusal to give Thorne and Morgana the satisfaction of her death. But this was different. This was love, raw and primal and absolute. She would do whatever it took to protect this child, would become whatever she needed to become. If that meant turning herself into a warrior, she would. If that meant learning to thrive in a frozen wasteland where nothing should survive, she would. The Frostlands had tried to kill her. Instead, they had given her a reason to live. The next morning, Ember woke with renewed determination. If she was going to bring a child into this world, she needed more than just survival. She needed security, supplies, a plan that extended beyond the next meal. She began by improving her shelter. The cave with the hot spring became her primary base. She dragged furs from her kills and layered them to create a proper bed, something that would keep both her and eventually a baby warm. She gathered dried moss and grass to stuff between the furs for insulation. She created storage areas, organizing her meager possessions with careful precision. A pile of firewood, painstakingly gathered from the rare scrub trees that clung to the southern slopes. A collection of sharp rocks that could serve as tools or weapons. Strips of meat drying over the warm vents from the hot spring. Her hunting became more strategic. She needed consistent food sources, not just lucky catches. So she studied the patterns of prey more carefully. Found the migration routes. Learned which areas held the most games. She discovered a small herd of ice deer, massive creatures with thick white fur and enormous antlers. Taking one down would require planning and risk, but a single deer could feed her for weeks. Ember spent days preparing. She crafted better weapons, spears with multiple points, a crude bow made from flexible wood and sinew. She scouted the herd's movements, learning their routines. And when the moment came, she struck with precision that would have shocked anyone who'd known her as a timid servant. The deer fell. Ember butchered it efficiently, wasting nothing. Meat for food. Hide for warmth and clothing. Bones for tools. Even the antlers, which she could use for digging or defense. That night, as she sat by her fire eating venison that actually tasted rich and satisfying, Ember allowed herself a small smile. "I'm doing this," she thought. "I'm actually doing this." Her hand rested on her stomach, where the small life continued to grow. You're going to be born into a harsh world, she whispered. But you'll never go hungry. You'll never be cold. And you'll never, ever be ashamed of what you are. The promise settled into her bones. But survival in the Frostlands meant more than just food and shelter. It meant understanding the dangers that lurked in the endless white. Ember had been lucky so far. She'd avoided the worst of the blizzards, found shelter before hypothermia could claim her. But she knew her luck wouldn't hold forever. And there were other threats. She found the tracks on her 5th week in the Frostlands. Wolf tracks. Large ones. Rogues. Ember's blood ran cold as she studied the prints in the snow. Multiple wolves, moving in a pack. Their scent, what little remained after the wind had scoured it, carried the distinctive wildness of wolves who had abandoned or been cast out from their packs. Rogues were dangerous. Without pack bonds to regulate their behavior, they often became savage, driven only by hunger and rage. They attacked anything they perceived as weak or vulnerable. And a pregnant Omega alone in the wilderness? That was about as vulnerable as it got. Ember's hand instinctively went to the knife she'd fashioned from deer bone, crude, but sharp enough to do damage. They haven't found the caves yet, her wolf observed. The tracks lead east. But they're hunting in this territory, Ember murmured. Eventually they'll find me. Then we make sure we're ready when they do. Ember nodded slowly. She spent the next several days fortifying her primary cave. She created a barrier at the entrance using rocks and branches. Not enough to keep out a determined wolf, but enough to slow them down and give her warning. She set up crude alarms, piles of loose stones balanced carefully that would clatter if disturbed, thin sinews stretched across the approach that would snap and alert her to intruders. And she trained. Every morning, Ember practiced with her weapons. Spear thrusts, knife strikes, movement patterns that would let her fight in close quarters if necessary. Her pregnant body was starting to change. She could feel it in the way her balance shifted, the way certain movements became more difficult. But she pushed through, knowing that weakness now meant death later. We're not prey anymore, her wolf growled during one particularly brutal training session. We're predators. Ember wiped sweat from her brow despite the cold, her breath misting in the air. Damn right we are, she agreed. But even as she prepared for potential threats, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered doubts. What if the rogues found her before she was ready? What if she went into labor and couldn't defend herself? What if? Stop, her wolf commanded. Fear is useful.
Panic is deadly.
Ember forced herself to breathe slowly, deliberately. Her wolf was right. She couldn't control everything, couldn't prepare for every possibility, but she could control her response. And she could make sure that anyone who threatened her or her child would regret it. That night, as Ember lay on her bed of furs, one hand resting on her growing belly, she thought about the life she'd left behind. The Crimson Veil Pack, the Ironwood Citadel, the world of politics and power and carefully maintained hierarchies. She'd been invisible there. Less than nothing. But here, in this frozen wasteland where she should have died, here, she was becoming something more. Something stronger. Something that didn't need permission to exist. Your father is an alpha king, she whispered to her unborn child. Powerful. Respected. Fierce. She paused, her jaw tightening. But he's also a coward who threw away his mate because she wasn't good enough for his throne. Her hand pressed more firmly against her stomach. You will never know that cowardice. You will be born from rejection, yes. But you will be raised in strength, in courage, in the absolute certainty that you are worthy, regardless of what any king or court says. The baby shifted inside her, still small, still fragile, but growing stronger every day. Just like Ember herself. Outside the cave, wind howled across the Frostlands. Snow fell in endless curtains. The world was cold and harsh and utterly unforgiving. But inside, warmed by hot springs and the fire of determination burning in her chest, Ember Ashford prepared for the future. A future where she was no longer a victim, where she was no longer invisible, where she would raise her child to be everything the Northern Kingdoms had told her an Omega could never be. Strong.
Proud.
Unbreakable. The Alpha King had sentenced her to death. Instead, he'd given her life. And soon, very soon, she would give that life to another. The thought terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. But one thing was certain. Ember Ashford would never be forgotten again. Chapter 5. The Rogue Pack. The scream tore through the frozen night. Ember bolted upright from her bed of furs, heart hammering. Her hand instinctively went to the bone knife at her side as she strained to hear over the wind. There it was again, distant but unmistakable. A wolf's howl, high-pitched and terrified. Not the hunting call of rogues. A cry for help. Ember's first instinct was to stay hidden. She was 7 weeks into her pregnancy now, her body changing in subtle ways that made her more vulnerable. Getting involved in whatever was happening out there was suicide. Survival first, her wolf agreed. We protect what's ours. But the scream came again, and this time Ember heard words woven into the howl. Please. Someone. Anyone. It was a woman's voice. Ember closed her eyes, jaw clenched. Every instinct screamed at her to stay put, to let whatever was happening play out without her involvement. But she knew that voice. Knew the desperation in it. Because she'd heard that same desperation in her own throat when the guards had dragged her to the throne room. When Thorne had rejected her. When they'd abandoned her in the snow to die.
Damn it.
Ember grabbed her spear and the fur cloak she'd crafted from deer hide. She moved to the cave entrance, peering out into the darkness. The moon was full tonight, casting silver light across the snow. And there, perhaps 100 yards away, she could see movement. 3 large wolves circled something smaller. Even from this distance, Ember could smell blood on the wind. The rogues had found prey, and their prey was still fighting. This isn't our problem, her wolf warned. We can't risk the child. I know, Ember whispered. But she was already moving. She stayed low, using the scattered rocks for cover as she crept closer. Her spear felt solid in her hand, a weapon she'd killed with, that she knew how to use. As she drew nearer, the scene became clearer. The 3 rogues were massive, clearly former pack warriors who'd been exiled or abandoned their packs. Their fur was matted and scarred, their eyes wild with bloodlust. In the center of their circle, a young woman fought desperately. She was small, barely out of her teens, with blonde hair matted with blood. She'd shifted partially, claws extended, teeth bared, but she was outmatched and she knew it. One of the rogues lunged. The girl dodged, but not fast enough. Claws raked across her shoulder, and she went down with a scream. Ember's wolf surged forward in her mind.
Now.
While they're distracted, before she could second-guess herself, Ember charged. She covered the distance in seconds, her spear leveled at the closest rogue. The wolf barely had time to register her presence before the stone tip buried itself in his shoulder. He roared, twisting away, blood staining the snow. The other 2 rogues spun toward her, snarls ripping from their throats. Oh, moon goddess, what have I done? But there was no time for regret. The second rogue launched himself at her. Ember dropped and rolled, her smaller size an advantage, as the massive wolf sailed over her. She came up with her knife drawn and slashed at his exposed belly as he passed. The blade bit deep. The rogue hit the snow and didn't get up. 2 down. 1 to go. But the 3rd rogue was the largest and the smartest. He didn't charge blindly. Instead, he circled, yellow eyes calculating as they moved between Ember and the injured girl. Get up, Ember shouted to the blonde. Can you shift? I think so. Then do it. Now. The rogue chose that moment to attack. He came in low and fast, jaws snapping at Ember's throat. She twisted away, but his claws caught her arm, tearing through fur and flesh. Pain exploded up her shoulder. Ember gasped but didn't fall. Instead, she used his momentum against him, dropping to her knees and driving her knife upward as he passed over her. The blade found his throat. Hot blood sprayed across the snow. The rogue collapsed, twitching once before going still. Silence fell over the frozen wasteland. Ember stood there, breathing hard, her wounded arm clutched against her chest. Blood dripped steadily from the claw marks, staining the snow at her feet. "We're hurt," her wolf whimpered. "And the baby?" "I'm fine," Ember gasped. "We're fine." She turned to the blonde girl, who had managed to shift back to human form. The girl stared at Ember with wide, disbelieving eyes. You saved me." "Can you walk?" Ember asked curtly. "I think so. My shoulder." "We need to move.
Now."
Before more of them show up." The girl nodded and struggled to her feet. She was shaking from cold, blood loss, or shock. Ember couldn't tell. "My cave isn't far," Ember said. "Come on." She grabbed the girl's uninjured arm and pulled her forward. Behind them, the bodies of the 3 rogues lay steaming in the snow. Ember had just killed 3 wolves. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, all she felt was grim satisfaction. "I've changed," she thought. "The Frostlands have changed me." They made it back to the cave without incident. Once inside, Ember quickly built up the fire and helped the girl sit near the warmth. "What's your name?" Ember asked as she gathered supplies to treat their wounds. "Rowan," the girl whispered. "Rowan Clearwater." "I'm Ember." She pressed a cloth against the gashes on Rowan's shoulder. "This is going to hurt." Rowan hissed as Ember cleaned the wounds with water from the hot spring, but she didn't pull away. "Why are you out here?" Ember asked as she worked. "The Frostlands aren't exactly a vacation spot." Rowan's jaw tightened. "I was banished. From the Clearwater Pack. My alpha, he tried to force me to become his second mate. When I refused, he accused me of insubordination and cast me out." Ember's hands still. "He sent you here to die." "Just like they sent you," Rowan observed quietly. "I can see it in your eyes. You're not a rogue by choice." "No," Ember agreed. "I'm not." She finished binding Rowan's shoulder, then turned her attention to her own wound. The claw marks were deep, but not life-threatening. She cleaned them as best she could and wrapped them tightly. The baby, her wolf, reminded her anxiously.
"Check the baby."
Ember pressed her hand to her stomach, focusing inward. For a terrifying moment, she felt nothing. Then there. A flutter. Faint but present. Relief flooded through her. "Are you pregnant?" Rowan asked suddenly. Ember's head snapped up. "How did you?" "I can smell it. Faintly, but it's there." Rowan's eyes widened. "You're pregnant, and you just fought off 3 rogues. Are you insane?" "Probably," Ember admitted. "But what choice did I have? Let them kill you? Let them find my cave and kill me later?" Rowan stared at her for a long moment. "You could have stayed hidden. Could have let me die. It would have been safer." "I know. So, why didn't you?" Ember was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "Because I know what it's like to be thrown away. To be told you're worthless. To face death alone because people in power decided you didn't deserve to live." She looked up, meeting Rowan's gaze. "And I decided I'm done letting people like that win." Rowan's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. For saving me. For not leaving me to die." Ember nodded. "Get some rest. We'll figure out what comes next in the morning." But as Rowan curled up on a pile of furs and sleep claimed her, Ember remained awake. Her mind churned with possibilities. She'd just saved someone's life. Fought and killed to protect a stranger. The old Ember, the servant, the Omega who kept her head down, would never have done that. But the new Ember? The one forged in ice and rejection and the fierce determination to protect her unborn child? She was capable of things she'd never imagined. And as she sat there, watching the fire cast dancing shadows across the cave walls, a dangerous thought took root. If one banished wolf had found her, how many others were out there? How many more had been cast out, told they were worthless, left to die in the Frostlands? And what would happen if they found each other? If they banded together? Ember's hand rested on her pregnant belly, her mind already spinning with plans. The Alpha King had thrown her away. But he'd made a critical mistake. He'd given her time. Time to grow stronger. Time to prepare. Time to gather others like her, the broken, the rejected, the forgotten. And when she was ready, when her child was born, and she'd built something worth protecting, Then she would show Thorne Ironwood exactly what he'd thrown away. The rejected Omega would return. But not alone. Never alone again. The next morning, Ember woke to find Rowan sitting up, staring at her with an expression of wonder and determination. "I want to help," Rowan said immediately. "Whatever you're building here, whatever you're planning, I want to be part of it." Ember raised an eyebrow. "What makes you think I'm planning anything?" "Because I recognize that look in your eyes," Rowan replied. "It's the same one I saw in the mirror after my alpha betrayed me. You're not just surviving. You're preparing." Ember studied the young woman for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. "You're right. I am preparing. For what? I'm not entirely sure yet. But I know I'm not going back to being invisible. To be powerless." "Good," Rowan said fiercely. "Because neither am I." A slow smile curved Ember's lips. "Then welcome to whatever this is, Rowan Clearwater. Welcome to the Pack of the Forgotten." Outside the cave, wind howled across endless white. But inside, something new was beginning. Something the Northern Kingdoms had never seen before. A pack born not from bloodlines or politics, but from rejection, survival, and the unbreakable will to matter. The Frostlands had tried to kill them. Instead, it had given them purpose. And soon, very soon, the kingdoms would learn what happened when you threw away wolves and expected them to simply die. They came back stronger. They came back together. And they came back ready for war. Chapter 6. The Pack of the Forgotten. 2 months had passed since Rowan stumbled into Ember's life. 2 months of careful survival, strategic planning, and an unexpected partnership that had transformed both of them. The cave system had become more than just shelter. It had become a home. A base. The beginning of something neither woman fully understood yet, but both felt growing with each passing day. Ember's pregnancy was now impossible to hide. At 3 months along, her belly had begun to curve outward, pressing against the leather and fur she wore. Her body had changed in other ways too, stronger from constant hunting and training, but also softer in places, preparing for the life growing inside her. She moved differently now, more carefully, but no less deadly. Rowan had proven herself invaluable. The young woman was quick, clever, and fiercely loyal. She'd taken to life in the Frostlands with surprising ease, her skills complementing Ember's in ways that made survival not just possible, but almost comfortable. Together, they'd expanded their territory, mapped the surrounding area, established multiple supply caches hidden in various locations, set up warning systems to alert them to approaching threats. And they'd found others. It started 3 weeks after Rowan's arrival. Ember and Rowan had been checking their snare lines when they'd spotted smoke rising from a distant ridge. Thin and barely visible against the gray sky, but unmistakable. Someone else was alive out here. They'd approached cautiously, weapons ready, expecting rogues or worse. Instead, they'd found a man. He was older, maybe 40, with silver streaking his dark hair and scars crisscrossing his exposed arms. He sat beside a pathetic excuse for a fire, his clothes torn, his face gaunt with hunger. But his eyes still burned with fierce intelligence. "Come to finish me off," he'd asked when he'd spotted them. No fear in his voice, just weary acceptance. "That depends," Ember had replied, her spear leveled at his chest. "Who are you and why are you here?" "Name's Marcus Stoneridge, former beta of the Iron Peak Pack." He'd laughed bitterly. "I questioned my alpha's decision to execute an Omega for stealing food to feed her starving children. He decided I was too soft, too weak. So here I am." Ember and Rowan had exchanged glances. "You're a beta," Rowan had said slowly. "But you stood up for an Omega?" "I stood up for what was right," Marcus had corrected. "Rank doesn't give you the right to be cruel." My alpha didn't appreciate that perspective. Ember had studied him for a long moment. Her instincts, sharper now than they'd ever been, told her he was telling the truth. "We have food," she'd said finally, lowering her spear. "And shelter. If you're willing to work, you're welcome to share both." Marcus had stared at her as if she'd spoken a foreign language. "You're inviting me to join you?" We're building something, Ember had replied. A place for wolves who were thrown away.
Who were told they didn't matter.
If that sounds like you, then yes. You're welcome. Marcus had followed them back to the caves that day, and he hadn't left since. The former beta brought skills neither Ember nor Rowan possessed. He knew how to build proper shelters, how to preserve meat more efficiently, and how to track weather patterns. He taught them fighting techniques, real combat training from someone who'd spent decades as a warrior. But more than that, he brought hope. If a beta could end up in the Frostlands for doing the right thing, then the pack hierarchies Ember had always accepted as unbreakable weren't as solid as she believed. And if those hierarchies could crack for a beta, they could shatter for an omega. The second exile they found was a woman named Iris Nightfall. She'd been a healer in the Shadowbrook pack until she'd tried to treat a rogue who'd stumbled into their territory, injured and desperate. Her alpha had declared her a traitor for showing mercy to an outsider. Iris was gentle, soft-spoken, with graying hair she wore in a long braid down her back. But her healing knowledge was invaluable, especially with Ember's pregnancy progressing. "You're carrying strong," Iris had said during her first examination, her experienced hands gentle on Ember's swollen belly. "Very strong. I can feel the life force radiating from the child." "Just one?" Ember had asked, hope and fear warring in her chest. Iris had gone still. Her eyes had closed, and for a long moment, she'd simply held her hands against Ember's stomach. When she'd opened her eyes again, they'd been wide with wonder. "Not one," she'd whispered.
"Two.
You're carrying twins." The world had tilted beneath Ember's feet. "Twins," she gasped. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without proper equipment. But yes, I feel two distinct heartbeats. Two distinct energy signatures." Iris had smiled. "Congratulations, Ember. You're going to be the mother of twins." Ember had sat in stunned silence for a long time after that revelation. Twins. 2 children. 2 lives depending on her. The weight of it had been crushing for about 5 minutes. Then her wolf surged forward, fierce and protective. "2, her wolf had growled. "We protect 2. We raise 2 strong cubs who will never bow to anyone." And just like that, the fear had transformed into determination. Thorne had thrown away not just a mate, but his heirs. Plural. Children who would have been princes or princesses, who would have united kingdoms. Instead, they would be raised here, in the Frostlands, among the forgotten and the rejected. And they would be strong. The 4th exile arrived during a blizzard. Ember and Marcus had been reinforcing the cave entrances when they'd heard howling, not threatening, but desperate. A distress call. They'd found him collapsed in the snow 50 yards from the caves. A young man, barely 20, half-frozen and delirious. They dragged him inside, and Iris had worked for hours to stabilize him. His name was Thorne Ashwood, and his story was perhaps the most heartbreaking of all. He'd been born a twin, but his brother had been the stronger one, the alpha-born son their parents had always favored. Cole had been overlooked his entire life, treated as lesser despite being from the same bloodline. When his brother had become alpha and taken a mate, Cole had congratulated him genuinely. His brother had seen it as mockery, as jealousy, and had banished Cole to the Frostlands out of paranoia and spite. "My own twin," Cole had whispered when he'd finally recovered enough to tell his story. "My own blood threw me away, because he couldn't stand having me around." Ember had understood that pain intimately. The rejection by those who should have protected you. The betrayal of bonds that should have been unbreakable. Cole had proven himself quickly. He was fast, agile, and had a natural talent for hunting that rivaled even Ember's hard-won skills. And so their number had grown to 5. Now, as Ember stood at the entrance to their main cave, watching the sun set over the frozen wasteland, she marveled at what they'd built. It wasn't a pack. Not officially. They had no alpha, no formal hierarchy, no territory recognized by the kingdoms. But it was something. 5 wolves who should have died, thriving instead. Thinking about the future? Marcus's voice came from behind her. Ember turned to find the former beta approaching, his arms loaded with firewood. Despite being the oldest among them, he never complained about hard work. Always, Ember admitted. Iris says the babies will come in another 5 or 6 months. That's not much time to prepare. We'll be ready, Marcus assured her. Iris knows what she's doing, and you're stronger than any Omega I've ever met. Ember's hand rested on her swollen belly. I have to be, for them. Marcus set down the firewood and stood beside her, gazing out at the darkening landscape. You know, when I first ended up here, I thought my life was over. Thought I'd die alone, forgotten. Just another exile the kingdoms would never think about again. And now I think maybe this is where I was supposed to end up. He glanced at her. You're building something important here, Ember. Something the kingdoms need, even if they don't know it yet. I'm not building anything, Ember protested. We're just surviving.
No.
Marcus shook his head firmly. Survival is what you were doing those first few weeks alone. This is different. You're creating a place where wolves can be valued for who they are, not what rank they were born into. Where exile doesn't mean death, but transformation. Ember was quiet for a moment. The kingdoms will never accept us. Maybe not, Marcus agreed. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is that we accept ourselves. Before Ember could respond, Rowan's voice called from deeper in the cave. Ember, you need to come see this. Ember and Marcus exchanged glances before heading inside. They found the others gathered around the hot spring, their faces illuminated by the glow of their fire. What is it? Ember asked. Rowan pointed to the far wall of the chamber, a section they rarely paid attention to because it was just bare rock. Except now, in the flickering firelight, Ember could see markings. Ancient markings. Carved into the stone were symbols. Wolves running beneath a full moon, figures standing in circles, what looked like a massive tree with roots spreading in all directions. How did we not see this before? Cole breathed. The angle of the light, Iris said softly. It only becomes visible when the fire is positioned exactly right. And with the 5 of us gathered here, she trailed off, but the implication hung in the air. Marcus stepped closer, running his fingers over the carvings. These are old. Very old. Pre-kingdom, maybe. What do they mean? Rowan asked. I'm not sure, Marcus admitted. But this symbol here, he pointed to a marking that looked like a circle with radiating lines. I've seen it in ancient texts. It represents the moon goddess. And this, he indicated the tree with spreading roots. This is the symbol for the first pack. The original wolves before the kingdom split and formed hierarchies. Ember's breath caught. The first pack. Legend says they were different, Marcus explained. No alphas or omegas. No ranks at all. Just wolves living in balance, each valued for their unique strengths. That's just a myth, Cole said skeptically. Maybe, Marcus allowed. Or maybe it was real, and the kingdoms tried to erase it when they established their hierarchies. Ember stared at the ancient carvings, her mind racing. A pack with no hierarchies, where everyone mattered. Wasn't that exactly what they were building? The first pack, she murmured. The forgotten wolves, finding each other again. She turned to face the others, and in that moment, something clicked into place. That's what we are, she said, her voice growing stronger. We're not rogues. We're not exiles. We're the wolves who remember what the kingdoms forgot. Which is? Iris prompted gently. That strength doesn't come from rank, Ember replied. It comes from unity. From valuing each wolf's unique gifts. From refusing to let anyone tell us we're worthless. She looked at each of them in turn. The kingdoms threw us away. But maybe they did us a favor. Because now we're free to build something better. Rowan stepped forward, her eyes shining. A new pack. Not just a pack, Marcus corrected, a slow smile spreading across his scarred face. A chosen pack. Bound not by birth or territory, but by shared purpose. Cole nodded eagerly. I like that. No alpha dictating our worth. Just wolves supporting each other. Will it work? Iris asked quietly. Can we truly build something lasting here? Ember's hand went to her belly, where her twins moved restlessly. We have to, because in a few months, these children will be born, and I refuse to bring them into a world where their worth is determined by their rank. She met each of their gazes.
So yes,
We build something lasting, something strong, something the kingdoms have never seen before. A pack of equals, Rowan breathed. The Frostborn pack, Marcus suggested, because this land tried to kill us, but instead forged us into something stronger. The name settled over them like a blessing. The Frostborn pack, born from rejection, forged in ice, united by choice. The Frostborn pack, Ember repeated, and the words felt right. It felt true. We're not victims anymore. We're survivors. And we're just getting started. Outside the cave, the aurora began to dance across the northern sky, ribbons of green and violet light painting the darkness. The moon goddess watching, approving perhaps, or warning, because the kingdoms didn't know it yet, but something had shifted in the Frostlands. The forgotten wolves had found each other, and they were no longer content to simply survive. Chapter 7. The Alpha King's Regret. 5 months had passed since the Harvest Moon Gala. 5 months after Alpha King Thorne Ironwood had rejected his fated mate and sentenced her to death in the Frostlands. 5 months that should have brought relief, clarity, and the satisfaction of a difficult but necessary decision. Instead, they had brought nothing but torment. Thorne sat alone in his private chambers, a glass of whiskey untouched on the table beside him. The fire crackled in the hearth, but its warmth couldn't touch the cold that had settled in his chest the moment he'd severed the mate bond.
severed.
That was the word everyone used.
Clean.
Final. As if cutting away your destined mate was no different than signing a treaty or settling a border dispute. But it hadn't been clean. And it certainly wasn't final. Because every night, Thorne dreamed of her. Ember Ashford. Her name haunted him. That face, delicate features, copper-red hair streaked with white, amber eyes that had looked at him with such hope before he'd crushed it, played on endless repetition in his mind. In his dreams, she didn't die in the Frostlands. In his dreams, she stood before him, belly swollen with his child, eyes filled with accusation and grief. You threw us away, Dream Ember would whisper. Your mate, your heir, all because you were afraid. Thorne would wake gasping, clawing at his chest where the phantom bond still ached like an open wound. His wolf was worse. The beast had been in constant turmoil since the rejection, snarling and pacing inside Thorne's mind, refusing to accept Lady Morgana, rejecting any attempt to form even the weakest chosen bond with the woman who now wore the title of queen. Mate, his wolf would growl. I need a mate. Wrong mate.
Wrong.
She's dead. Thorne would tell the beast. Ember is dead. We made our choice. Your choice, his wolf would snap back. Not mine. Never mine. The arguments were exhausting. And endless. Thorne rose from his chair and moved to the window, staring out over the Ironwood citadel. Lights glittered in the darkness, his kingdom prosperous and peaceful. He should be satisfied. He'd chosen duty over desire, strength over sentiment. He'd allied himself with the powerful Silverclaw family through his marriage to Morgana. His kingdom was secure. So, why did he feel like he was dying inside? A knock at the door interrupted his brooding. Enter, he called, not bothering to turn around. The door opened and his second, a grizzled warrior named Victor, stepped inside. Your Majesty, the council is waiting. Thorne's jaw tightened. Tell them I'll be there shortly. With respect, sire, they've been waiting for over an hour. Lady Morgana is displeased. Lady Morgana is always displeased, Thorne thought bitterly. His chosen queen had proven herself to be everything he'd expected, politically savvy, ruthlessly efficient, ambitious. She'd taken to her role with enthusiasm, inserting herself into every aspect of governance. But she wasn't his mate, and his wolf made sure he never forgot it. Fine, Thorne said shortly. I'm coming. He followed Victor through the corridors, his mind only half present. The citadel felt wrong lately.
Cold.
Empty. as if something vital had been cut out of it. Or maybe that was just him. The council chamber was packed when he arrived. Advisors lined the long table, their faces carefully neutral. At the far end, seated in what should have been Luna's chair, was Morgana. She looked every inch a queen. Her black hair was styled elaborately, her emerald gown cut to emphasize her curves. Jewels glittered at her throat and wrists, a display of wealth and power. But when she looked at him, Thorne saw only calculation in her green eyes. No warmth, no affection, just ambition wearing a beautiful mask. "Your Majesty," she purred as he took his seat at the head of the table. "So glad you could finally join us." The subtle rebuke wasn't lost on anyone present. Thorne's wolf snarled. "Not our Luna. Never our Luna." "Forgive the delay," Thorne said flatly. "Shall we proceed?" The meeting was tedious. Reports on crop yields, trade negotiations, minor territorial disputes. Things that normally Thorne would have handled with ease. But today, his mind kept wandering. To copper-red hair streaked with white. To amber eyes filled with hurt. To the exact moment the mate bond had snapped into place, and he'd felt complete for the first time in his life. "Don't you agree, Your Majesty?" Thorne blinked, realizing Morgana had asked him a question. "I'm sorry, what?" Morgana's smile tightened. "I was saying that we should increase patrols along the northern border. There have been reports of rogue activity near the Frostlands." Something cold slithered down Thorne's spine. The Frostlands?
Yes.
Nothing to be concerned about, I'm sure. Just a few exiles banding together. We'll send troops to eliminate them before they become a problem. "No," Thorne said sharply. The entire council went silent. Morgana's eyebrows rose. "No." "No troops to the Frostlands," Thorne repeated. His wolf was suddenly alert, hackles raised. "Not yet. I want more information first." "Information about what?" "They're just rogues and exiles. Hardly a threat to the kingdom." "Then they hardly warrant our attention," Thorne countered. "If they're surviving in the Frostlands, they're staying far from our territories. Let them be." Morgana's lips pressed into a thin line. "As you wish, Your Majesty. Though I think you're being overly cautious." "Caution keeps kingdoms safe," Thorne replied. But that wasn't why he'd refused. He didn't know why he'd refused. Or maybe he did, and he just didn't want to admit it. Because somewhere in the back of his mind, an impossible thought whispered. What if she survived? After the meeting, Thorne retreated to his study. He'd barely sat down when Victor appeared in the doorway. "Sire, there's someone here to see you. Says it's urgent."
Who? Derek.
One of the guards who handled the Ashford girl's banishment. Thorne's blood ran cold. "Send him in." The young guard who entered looked nervous, his hands twisting his cap. He'd been fresh-faced and eager 5 months ago. Now he looked haunted. "Your Majesty," Derek said, bowing low. "Forgive the intrusion, but I needed to speak with you about the Omega." "She's dead," Thorne said flatly. "What more is there to discuss?" "That's just it, sire. I don't think she is." The world tilted. Thorne was on his feet before he realized he'd moved.
"Explain. Now."
Derek swallowed hard. "When we left her in the Frostlands, she was alive. Barely, but alive. And something's been bothering me ever since. The tracks, sire. When I looked back, I saw her moving. Saw her footprints heading toward the cliffs." "That doesn't mean she survived," Thorne said, but his wolf was howling inside his mind.
"No, sire."
"But 3 weeks ago, I was on patrol near the northern edge. And I saw smoke. Not a lot, just a thin wisp, but it was there. Coming from the Frostlands." Thorne's heart hammered against his ribs. Smoke could mean anything.
Rogues.
Natural phenomena. "Yes, sire. Except..." Derek hesitated. "Except I caught a scent on the wind. Faint, but unmistakable. Wildflowers and honey. Ember's scent." Thorne gripped the edge of his desk so hard the wood cracked beneath his fingers. "You're certain?" he demanded. "As certain as I can be, Your Majesty. I could be wrong. It's been months, and the wind in the Frostlands plays tricks. But I thought you should know." Thorne stared at the young guard for a long moment. If Ember had survived, if she was alive out there, "You did the right thing coming to me," Thorne said finally. "But Derek, tell no one else about this. Do you understand?" "No one." "Yes, Your Majesty." After Derek left, Thorne sank into his chair, his mind reeling.
Alive.
The word pulsed through him like a heartbeat. She could be alive. His mate. The woman he'd rejected, humiliated, and sentenced to death. She could be alive. And if she was... Thorne's wolf surged forward with a force that nearly broke his control. "Find her," the beast roared. "Find mate. Protect mate." "She won't want to be found," Thorne said aloud. "Not by me. Not after what I did to her." "Doesn't matter. Find her anyway." Thorne pressed his hands to his face, torn between hope and horror. If Ember was alive, she'd been surviving in the Frostlands for 5 months. Alone. Abandoned. Left to die by the man fate had chosen for her. She would hate him. She would have every right to hate him. But his wolf didn't care about hate. His wolf only cared about one thing. Mate lives. I must find a mate. Must protect mate. Thorne stood abruptly and moved to the window, staring north toward the frozen wasteland that had haunted his dreams. He'd made his choice at the gala. Rejected her. Chosen Morgana instead. But what if it had been the wrong choice? What if the vision he'd seen, the one that had shown him ruin and destruction tied to a copper-haired Omega, had been a lie? The thought sent ice through his veins. Morgana had been so quick to support his decision. So eager to take Luna's place. Almost as if she'd known exactly what to say to push him toward rejection. No, he told himself firmly. I made the choice. No one forced my hand. But doubt, once planted, was impossible to uproot. And now, knowing Ember might be alive, Thorne made a decision. He would go north. Not with an army. Not with fanfare. Just himself and a small group he trusted. He would search the Frostlands. And if he found her, if she was truly alive, then he would beg forgiveness on his knees, if that's what it took. Because living without his mate for 5 months had taught Thorne Ironwood one undeniable truth. He'd made the biggest mistake of his life at that gala. And if the moon goddess gave him even the slightest chance to fix it, he would take it. Even if Ember never forgave him. Even if she rejected him the way he'd rejected her. He had to know. He had to see her one more time. His wolf rumbled agreement, finally aligned with him for the first time since the rejection. Find mate, the beast whispered. Bring mate home. Thorne stared at his reflection in the window glass, a king who had everything and nothing all at once. I'm coming, Ember, he whispered to the darkness. I don't know if you're alive. I don't know if you'll want to see me, but I'm coming. And in the frozen north, separated by hundreds of miles of ice and snow, Ember Ashford stood at the entrance to her cave with her hand resting on her heavily pregnant belly. She didn't know the Alpha King was finally questioning his choices. Didn't know he was planning to come north. All she knew was that her children would be born soon. And when they were strong enough, then she would show the kingdoms what happened when you threw away a mate. The storm was coming. Both of them could feel it. The only question was, who would survive when it finally broke? Chapter 8. Birth in the Frozen North. The contraction started at dawn. Ember had been checking their supply cache when the first wave of pain seized her abdomen, stealing her breath and forcing her to grab the cave wall for support. No, she thought desperately. Not yet. It's too soon. But her body disagreed. She was 7 months pregnant, early, but not dangerously so according to Iris. The healer had warned her that twins often came ahead of schedule, especially given the harsh conditions and constant physical demands of life in the Frostlands. Still, Ember had hoped for more time. More preparation. The universe, it seemed, had other plans. Rowan, she called, her voice strained. Get Iris. Now. The young woman appeared from deeper in the cave system, took one look at Ember's face, and ran. Within minutes, the entire Frostborn pack had mobilized. Iris hurried to Ember's side, her healer's instincts taking over immediately. How far apart are the contractions? I don't know. That was the first one. Even as she spoke, another wave built, cresting through her body like a tsunami of pain. Ember gasped, doubling over. "We need to get her to the birthing chamber," Iris said calmly. "Marcus, Cole, help me move her. Rowan, I need hot water, clean clothes, and the medicinal herbs I've been preparing. Move." They'd set up a separate chamber weeks ago specifically for this moment, a smaller cave off the main system, warmed by a natural hot spring vent and lined with the softest furs they could gather. Marcus and Cole supported Ember on either side as they made their way through the passages. Each step sent fresh jolts of pain through her body, but Ember gritted her teeth and kept moving. For them, she told herself. For the babies. I can do this. Her wolf stirred, lending what strength she could. We can do this. We've survived worse. But as another contraction hit, stronger than the last, barely 2 minutes after the previous one, Ember wasn't so sure. They reached the birthing chamber and settled her onto the prepared bed. The furs were warm, the air humid from the spring. Iris had thought of everything. "This is happening fast," the healer muttered, checking Ember's progress. "Faster than I expected. Is that bad?" Ember panted. "Not necessarily. It just means your body is ready. The babies are ready." Iris looked up, her gray eyes steady and reassuring. "You're going to do beautifully, Ember. I've delivered dozens of pups in my years as a healer. Trust me." Ember nodded, though fear clawed at her throat. Women died in childbirth all the time, even with skilled healers and proper facilities. And she had neither, just Iris, a cave in the frozen wasteland, and her own stubborn determination to survive. "Not good enough," fear whispered. "You're going to die. The babies are going to die." And oh, her wolf snarled. "We fight. We live." The hours that followed blurred into a haze of pain and effort. Contractions came faster, harder, each one feeling like it might tear her apart from the inside. Ember screamed, sobbed, cursed the moon goddess and Thorne Ironwood, and fate itself. Marcus stood guard at the entrance, giving her privacy, but close enough to help if needed. Cole paced outside, his anxiety palpable even through the stone walls. Rowan held Ember's hand, whispering encouragement even as Ember's grip threatened to break her bones. "You're doing so well," Rowan said again and again. "So strong. Almost there." "I can't," Ember gasped during a brief reprieve between contractions. Sweat soaked her hair, plastered it to her face. "I can't do this. It's too much." "You can," Iris said firmly, "because you have to. Those babies need you to be strong just a little longer." "I hate him," Ember sobbed. "I hate Thorne for doing this to me. For not being here. For..." The next contraction cut off her words, and she screamed. "That's it," Iris exclaimed. "I can see the first one crowning. Ember, when the next contraction comes, you push with everything you have. Understand?" Ember nodded, too exhausted to speak. The contraction built like a wave, and when it crested, Ember bore down with every ounce of strength she possessed. Pain exploded through her, white-hot and all-consuming. And then suddenly, impossibly, it eased. A cry filled the chamber. Thin and furious and absolutely perfect. "It's a boy," Iris announced, holding up a tiny, squirming bundle covered in blood and vernix. A strong, healthy boy. Tears streamed down Ember's face as Iris quickly cleaned the baby and placed him on her chest. He was so small, so impossibly fragile. Dark hair covered his head, and when he opened his eyes, just for a moment, they glowed with amber fire. Alphaborn, Ember realized with awe, just like his father. "Hello, my warrior," she whispered, kissing his forehead. "Welcome to the world."
But there was no time to rest.
"The second one's coming," Iris warned. "Rowan, take the boy. Keep him warm." Rowan carefully lifted the baby, wrapping him in furs and cradling him close. And Ember, exhausted beyond measure, prepared to do it all over again. The second birth was harder. The baby was positioned awkwardly, and each contraction felt like it might kill her. Ember's vision grayed at the edges. Her wolf whimpered, weakened by the ordeal. Stay with me, Ember, Iris commanded. Don't you dare give up now. Your daughter needs you. Daughter. The word cut through the fog of pain. Ember had a son and a daughter waiting to meet each other. Two children who needed their mother alive. She gathered what remained of her strength and pushed. The pain peaked to an unbearable crescendo. And then it was over. A second cry joined the first. Softer but no less fierce. A girl. Iris breathed, her own voice thick with emotion. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. The baby was cleaned and placed in Ember's arms beside her brother. She had copper-red hair like her mother, fine as silk. And when her eyes opened, they weren't amber like her twins. They were silver. Thorne's eyes. Ember's heart clenched. Hello, little star, she whispered. I'm your mama. The babies quieted at her voice, as if recognizing the sound they'd heard for months from inside the womb. For a long moment, the chamber was silent except for the soft breathing of the twins and the crackling of the fire. Ember looked at her children, these tiny, perfect lives she created, and felt something shift inside her. All the pain, all the rejection, all the suffering she'd endured. It had led to this moment.
To them.
They're beautiful, Rowan whispered from where she stood nearby, tears streaming down her face. They're everything, Ember agreed. Iris checked both babies thoroughly, her experienced hands gentle but thorough. Strong heartbeats. Good color. Breathing well. They're small, but that's to be expected with twins. They'll grow. Will they be okay? Ember asked, unable to keep the fear from her voice. Being born here, in these conditions? They were born to a mother who survived the Frostlands alone and pregnant, Iris said firmly. They have your strength in their blood. They'll not only be okay, they'll be extraordinary. Marcus appeared at the entrance, his scarred face soft with wonder. May I? Ember nodded. The former beta approached slowly, reverently. When he looked at the twins, his eyes grew suspiciously bright. They're powerful, he said quietly. I can feel it already. The alpha energy radiating from them. It's unlike anything I've ever sensed. They're Thorne's children, Ember said, her voice hardening slightly. Of course they're powerful. No, Marcus corrected gently. They're your children. His blood might run in their veins, but your strength, your will, your refusal to break. That's what I feel when I look at them. That's what will define them. Ember's throat tightened with emotion. Cole and Rowan crowded into the chamber, both desperate for a glimpse of the newest members of their pack. What will you name them? Cole asked. Ember looked down at her children. The boy with his amber eyes and fierce little scowl. The girl with her silver gaze and delicate features. The boy, she said slowly, will be Asher. It means blessed and happy. Because despite everything, that's what he is to me. And the girl? Iris prompted. Ember studied her daughter's face, seeing echoes of both herself and Thorne in those tiny features. Nova, she decided. It means new and star. Because she's the light that will guide us forward. The beginning of something new. Asher and Nova, Rowan breathed. Perfect names for perfect babies. The Frostborn pack gathered around their leader and her newborn twins, forming a protective circle. They had no grand citadel. No title or territory recognized by the kingdoms. No wealth or political power. But they had this. A family forged not by blood or obligation, but by choice and survival. Welcome to the Frostborn pack, Asher and Nova, Marcus said formally. You're born into a family that chose each other. That fought and bled and refused to die. Your mother is the strongest wolf I've ever known, and we will all protect you with our lives. The others murmured agreement, and Ember, exhausted and overwhelmed and more deeply moved than she'd ever been, looked at her children and made them a promise. You will never be rejected, she whispered. Never be told you're not good enough. Never be thrown away like garbage. You are loved. You are wanted. And you will grow up knowing that your worth doesn't depend on anyone's approval. Her voice grew stronger. Your father is an alpha king. But you are the children of the Frostlands, born in ice and fire, and you'll be strong. Outside the cave, The wind howled across the frozen wasteland. But inside, surrounded by warmth and love and the fierce determination of wolves who had chosen each other, the future began. 3 days after the birth, Ember was already on her feet. Iris had protested, insisting she needed more rest. But Ember was restless, driven by instincts she didn't fully understand. The twins were healthy, nursing well, and growing stronger by the day. The pack had rallied around them, taking shifts watching over the babies so Ember could sleep. But even with help, exhaustion dragged at her. Being a mother was the hardest thing she'd ever done, and the most rewarding. Every time Asher gripped her finger with his tiny fist, every time Nova looked at her with those piercing silver eyes, Ember felt her heart expand until she thought it might burst. This is what I was fighting for, she realized. This is why I survived. On the 4th day, Marcus came to her with news. We spotted movement to the south, he said quietly, careful not to wake the sleeping twins. A group of wolves. 5, maybe 6. Heading in our direction. Ember's blood ran cold. Rogues. Can't tell yet. They're still too far away. But they're organized. Moving with purpose. Could be hunters from the kingdoms, Cole suggested. Looking for rogues to eliminate. Or, Rowan said slowly, they could be more exiles. Looking for shelter. Ember looked at her children, sleeping peacefully in their nest of furs. A month ago, she might have hidden. Might have taken her children deeper into the cave system and waited for the threat to pass. But she wasn't that Ember anymore. We will meet them, she decided. But carefully. Marcus, Cole, you're with me. Rowan, stay here with Iris and the twins. If anything goes wrong, you take them deeper into the caves and hide. Ember, you just gave birth 3 days ago, Iris protested. You're in no condition to. I'm fine, Ember cut her off. And I'm the leader of this pack. If someone's coming to our territory, I will meet them first. She could see the worry in their faces, but no one argued further. Ember kissed each of her sleeping babies on the forehead, whispered a prayer to the moon goddess to keep them safe, and headed out into the snow. Whatever was coming, she would face it head-on. Because she was Ember Ashford, rejected mate, banished Omega, mother of twins, leader of the Frostborn pack. And she would protect what was hers with her dying breath. The approaching wolves would learn that soon enough. Chapter 9. The Confrontation. The wind cut across the frozen tundra like a blade. Ember stood at the southern edge of their territory, if you could call the area they'd claimed a territory. Behind her, Marcus and Cole flanked her position, both armed and alert. Her body still ached from childbirth. Her breasts were heavy with milk, and exhaustion pulled at her bones. But she stood straight, shoulders back, projecting a confidence she didn't entirely feel. Fake it until you make it, her wolf advised. Alpha energy responds to certainty. The approaching group came into view as they crested a distant ridge. 6 wolves, just as Marcus had estimated. They moved in formation. Not the chaotic scramble of rogues, but the disciplined march of trained warriors. Ember's stomach dropped. Kingdom wolves, she breathed. We can still retreat, Cole said urgently. Get back to the caves before they spot us. But it was too late. The lead wolf, massive, with midnight black fur, had already seen them. He raised one hand, signaling his group to halt. For a long, tense moment, the two groups stared at each other across the snow. Then the black wolf shifted. Ember's world tilted. Even from this distance, she knew that silhouette. The broad shoulders. The powerful build. The way he carried himself with absolute authority.
No.
It can't be. But as the figure approached, there was no denying it. Alpha King Thorne Ironwood stood before her, as real as the snow beneath her feet. For 5 months, Ember had survived without him. Built the life, a pack, a future. She'd given birth to his children without him, raised them for 4 days, without his knowledge. And now he was here. The man who had rejected her, humiliated her, sentenced her to death. Standing less than 50 yards away, Ember's hands clenched into fists. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to grab her children and disappear deeper into the Frostlands where he could never find them. But she was done running. "Marcus, Cole," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. "Stay alert. If this goes wrong, you get back to the caves and protect the twins. That's an order." "Ember," Marcus began. "That's an order," she repeated, her tone brooking no argument. Both men nodded reluctantly. Thorne was close enough now that Ember could see his face clearly. And what she saw there made her breath catch. He looked terrible. Dark circles shadowed his amber eyes. His face was gaunt, as if he hadn't been eating properly. His midnight hair was longer, less carefully maintained than she remembered. But it was his expression that shocked her most. There was no disgust, no cold dismissal. Instead, his eyes were wide with disbelief, with hope, with something that looked almost like desperation. "Ember," he breathed, his voice cracking on her name. The sound of it, her name in his mouth after so long, sent conflicting emotions crashing through her.
Rage. Grief.
A treacherous flutter of the severed mate bond that still ached in her chest. "Your Majesty," she replied coldly, deliberately formal. "You're far from your kingdom." Thorne flinched as if she'd struck him. "You're alive. Moon Goddess, you're actually alive." Disappointed. The words came out sharp as broken glass.
"No."
"No, He took a step forward, and immediately Marcus and Cole moved to block him, weapons raised. Thorne's companions, 5 wolves Ember didn't recognize, tensed, hands going to their own weapons. "Stand down," Thorne ordered his group. Then, to Ember's shock, he raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to fight. I needed to see if the reports were true. If you'd really survived." "Well, now you've seen," Ember said, her voice like ice. "I survived. Congratulations. You can return to your kingdom with a clear conscience." "Ember, please."
"Don't."
She cut him off, her amber eyes blazing. "You don't get to Ember please me.
You rejected me.
You called me weak, worthless. You sentenced me to die in this frozen hell. So forgive me if I'm not thrilled to see you." Pain flashed across Thorne's face. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I need to explain." "Explain what?" Ember's voice rose, months of suppressed emotion finally breaking free. "Explain how you felt the mate bond just like I did? How did you know the moon goddess chose us and you rejected me anyway? Explain how you let that woman frame me for theft and sentence me to death without even questioning the evidence." Thorne's jaw clenched. "Morgana?" "I don't want to hear her name," Ember shouted. "I don't want to hear your excuses or your explanations or whatever pretty words you've prepared to make yourself feel better about what you did." She was shaking now, fury and grief warring inside her. "You threw me away like garbage. You looked at me, your fated mate, and decided I wasn't good enough for your precious throne. So you chose someone else. Someone worthy." Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not in front of him. Never in front of him. "So take your guilt and your regret and go home, Your Majesty. I don't need your apologies. I don't need anything from you." Thorne looked like she'd ripped his heart out. "Ember, I was wrong. I made a terrible mistake. I've spent every day since that gala regretting." "Regret doesn't change anything," Ember interrupted. "Regret doesn't undo 5 months of fighting to survive. Regret doesn't erase the nights I spent freezing, starving, wondering if I'd live to see morning." Her voice broke slightly, and she hated herself for it. "I was dying, Thorne. And you were sitting in your warm citadel with your chosen queen, probably not thinking about me at all." "That's not true," Thorne said hoarsely. "I thought about you every day, every night. My wolf hasn't given me a moment's peace since I rejected you. The bond, even severed, it still aches. Like something vital was torn out of me." "Good," Ember said viciously. "I hope it hurts. I hope it never stops hurting. Because that's a fraction of what you did to me." Thorne took another step forward, and this time his eyes were pleading. "Let me make it right.
Please.
Come back to the Citadel with me. You'll have everything, wealth, comfort, safety. I'll denounce Morgana, expose what she did. I'll make you my Luna, give you the title and respect you always deserved. For a moment, just a heartbeat, Ember felt tempted. The life he was offering, security,
Power.
everything she'd never had as an Omega. Then she thought of Asher and Nova, sleeping peacefully in the caves. Of the Frostborn pack who had chosen her as their leader. Of the strength she'd built here, in this harsh land that had tried to kill her. No, she said firmly. Thorne's face crumpled. No. I don't want her title. I don't want your citadel, or your wealth, or your guilt-driven generosity. Ember lifted her chin. I have everything I need right here. Here. Thorne looked around at the frozen wasteland, disbelief clear in his voice. Ember, you can't survive here. It's impossible. Come back with me, let me. I've been surviving here for 5 months, Ember interrupted. And I'm not alone. I have a pack. Wolves who were thrown away just like me. We've built something here. Something real. Something that doesn't depend on rank or bloodlines or politics. Understanding dawned slowly in Thorne's eyes. The reports of rogues banding together, that was you? We're not rogues, Ember corrected coldly. We're the Frostborn pack. And we don't answer to any kingdom. Behind Thorne, one of his companions, a stern-faced warrior with gray streaking his temples, spoke up. Your Majesty, perhaps we should. No, Victor. Thorne cut him off. His eyes never left Ember's face. Ember, please. At least hear me out. Let me explain what happened. Why did I reject you? I already know why, Ember said bitterly. I wasn't good enough. I was just an Omega, and you needed someone strong beside you. Someone who wouldn't embarrass you. That's not. Thorne ran his hands through his hair in frustration. Moon Goddess, that's not why. I had a vision, Ember. The night before the gala. I saw you standing in ruins, surrounded by fire and blood. I saw my kingdom destroyed, and you at the center of it all. I was told, that you would bring ruin to everything I'd built. Ember went still. A vision?
Yes.
I know how it sounds, but I swear it's true. I saw. Who told you? Ember interrupted, her mind racing. Who interpreted this vision for you? Thorne hesitated. Morgana. She had witches in her employ. Seers who? Witches. Ember laughed, but there was no humor in it. Of course. She manipulated you, from the beginning. Planted the vision, interpreted it to suit her purposes, framed me for theft. And you believed every word. Shame colored Thorne's features. I know. I should have questioned it. Should have investigated. But I was afraid. Afraid of losing my kingdom, my people. And in my fear, I lost something far more precious. He took another step closer, and this time Marcus and Cole didn't stop him. I lost you, Thorne continued, his voice raw. I lost my mate. And I've been paying for that mistake every day since. Ember wanted to stay angry. Wanted to cling to her rage like armor. But seeing him like this, broken, regretful, genuine, made it harder. It doesn't matter, she said finally, though her voice was less certain. What's done is done. You made your choice and I made mine. I've built a life here. A good life. I can see that, Thorne said softly. And I'm not asking you to give it up. I need you to know that I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. And if there's any chance, any possibility, that you might someday forgive me. He trailed off, hope and fear warring in his eyes. Ember opened her mouth to respond, and that's when she heard it. A thin, distant cry carried on the wind. Nova. Her daughter was crying. Ember's entire body went rigid. Every maternal instinct screamed at her to run back to the caves, to comfort her child. But moving would reveal the twins' existence. Would reveal Thorne's children. And she wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. What was that? Thorne asked, his wolf's hearing apparently catching the sound too. Nothing, Ember said quickly. Just the wind. But the cry came again, and this time Asher joined his sister. Both babies, wailing in distress. Thorne's eyes widened. That's not wind. That's... He stopped, nostrils flaring as he caught a scent on the breeze. A scent that was part ember, part himself, and entirely new. His face went pale. Ember, is that? We need to go, Ember said urgently to Marcus and Cole. Now. But Thorne was already moving, his wolf driving him forward with instincts he couldn't control. You're pregnant, he said, voice filled with wonder and shock. The scent you're carrying. I was pregnant, Ember corrected, backing away. Not anymore. Thorne stopped as if he'd hit a wall. You gave birth. Here. Alone. Not alone, Ember said. I had my pack. Our child, Thorne breathed. You've had our child. Ember's silence was answer enough. I need to see them, Thorne said, and the desperation in his voice was palpable. Please, Ember. Let me see my child. Your child. Ember's anger reignited. Your child? You gave up any claim to them when you rejected me. When you sent me here to die. I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life making up for it if you let me. But please, please don't keep me from them. Ember looked at him, this powerful alpha king reduced to begging in the snow. Part of her wanted to refuse out of spite, to make him suffer the way she'd suffered. But another part, the part that remembered the mate bond, that saw genuine anguish in his eyes, hesitated. They're not a child, she said finally. They're children. Twins. Thorne swayed as if the words had physically struck him. Twins. A boy and a girl. 4 days old. And they're mine, Thorne. Not yours. Not the kingdom's. Mine. I understand, Thorne said hoarsely. But please, Ember. Let me at least see them once. Just once. I'm begging you. Ember stood frozen, torn between conflicting desires. Her children deserved to know their father. But did their father deserve to know them? Before she could decide, Rowan's voice called out from the direction of the caves. Ember, the babies won't stop crying. They need you. The decision was made for her. Ember looked at Thorne, then at his companions, then back at Thorne. You can see them, she said finally. But only you. Your pack stays here with mine. And if you do anything at all, to threaten my children or my pack, I will kill you myself. Alpha King or not. Thorne nodded immediately. Agreed. Just me. I swear it. Ember turned to Marcus. Watch his people. If they make a move toward the caves, stop them. With pleasure, Marcus replied, his eyes hard as he stared down the kingdom of wolves. Then Ember began walking back toward her home, the Alpha King following behind her like a shadow. She was about to show Thorne Ironwood what he'd thrown away. And part of her hoped it broke him. The way he'd broken her. Chapter 10. The truth revealed. The walk back to the caves felt endless. Ember was acutely aware of Thorne behind her, his presence like a physical weight pressing against her back. She could hear his breathing, controlled but heavy. Could smell his scent, pine smoke and winter rain, carried on the wind. The mate bond, even severed, still sang between them. A broken thread trying desperately to reconnect. Her wolf whimpered, torn between rage at what he'd done and longing for what could have been. Focus, Ember told herself. The twins need you. That's all that matters. As they approached the cave entrance, Thorne spoke for the first time since they'd started walking. How did you survive? His voice was quiet, filled with genuine wonder. The Frostlands have killed experienced warriors. How did an Omega? He stopped himself. I'm sorry. That came out wrong. No, you're right, Ember said without turning around. An Omega shouldn't have survived. That's what you were counting on when you sent me here. I wasn't, Thorne's voice cracked. I never wanted you to die, Ember. I thought banishment would be enough. I thought you'd find your way to one of the outer settlements, that someone would take pity. Take pity on a convicted thief? Ember laughed bitterly. On a rejected mate? You knew exactly what you were doing, Thorne. You just convinced yourself otherwise, so you could sleep at night. Silence fell between them again. They reached the narrow entrance to the cave system. Ember had to squeeze through sideways, and she heard Thorne grunt as his broader shoulders scraped against stone. Good. Let him be uncomfortable. Inside, the temperature rose immediately. The hot springs that ran beneath the caves kept the air warm and humid, a stark contrast to the frozen wasteland outside. The crying grew louder as they moved deeper into the tunnels. Ember's breasts ached in response to her children's distress, milk already beginning to leak. She quickened her pace, maternal instinct overriding everything else. They emerged into the main chamber, and Ember's heart clenched at the sight before her. Rowan sat near the fire, desperately trying to soothe both crying babies at once. Iris hovered nearby, offering suggestions. Both women looked relieved when Ember appeared. "They won't stop," Rowan said apologetically. "I tried everything, but they want you." "It's all right," Ember assured her, reaching for her children. "They're hungry." She gathered both babies against her chest, and immediately their cries quieted to whimpers. Asher's tiny fist gripped her shirt. Nova's silver eyes blinked up at her, still wet with tears. "Hello, my loves," Ember whispered, kissing each small head. "Mama's here. I'm sorry I left you." Behind her, she heard Thorne's sharp intake of breath. She'd almost forgotten he was there. Slowly, Ember turned to face him, her children cradled protectively in her arms. Thorne stood frozen in the entrance to the chamber, his face a mask of shock and wonder and grief all twisted together. His amber eyes were fixed on the babies, and as Ember watched, tears began to stream down his face. "Moon Goddess," he breathed. "They're real. They're actually real." "Did you think I was lying?" Ember asked coldly. "No, his voice broke. "I didn't dare hope. Didn't dare believe." He took a tentative step forward, then stopped, as if afraid of getting too close. "May I?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ember hesitated. Every protective instinct screamed at her to refuse, to keep him away from her precious babies. But she thought of all the nights she'd spent alone, wondering if her children would ever know their father. If they would grow up with the same abandonment wounds she carried. "You can look," she said finally, "but don't touch them. Not yet." Thorne nodded and moved closer with the careful movements of someone approaching a sacred altar. When he was close enough to see them clearly, his breath caught audibly. Asher had fallen asleep against Ember's chest, one small hand fisted in her shirt. His dark hair, so like his father's, stood up in adorable tufts. Even in sleep, his features held an intensity that promised strength. Nova remained awake, her silver eyes, Thorne's eyes, tracking his movement with unsettling awareness for a newborn. "She has my eyes," Thorne said, wondering thick in his voice. "Yes," Ember confirmed. "And he has yours too, just a different shade. Asher's are amber, like yours in wolf form." "Asher," Thorne repeated softly, testing the name. "And the girl?" "Nova." Asher and Nova. Tears continued to fall unchecked down his face. "They're perfect, Ember. Absolutely perfect." Despite herself, Ember felt a surge of pride. "Yes, they are." "I can feel their power," Thorne continued, his voice filled with awe. "Even this young, the alpha energy is unmistakable. They're going to be incredibly strong." "I know," Ember said. "Iris says she's never felt anything like it." Thorne's gaze shifted from the babies to Ember's face, and what she saw there made her breath catch. Raw, devastating grief. "You did this alone," he said, "and it wasn't a question. You survived the Frostlands, built a life here, carried our children, and gave birth without me. Without any of the resources or support you should have had." "I wasn't completely alone," Ember replied, nodding toward Rowan and Iris. "My pack was with me." "Your pack." Thorne looked at the two women, really seeing them for the first time. "More exiles. More wolves your kingdoms threw away," Ember corrected. "Yes." Rowan stepped forward, her young face hard. "I was banished because I refused to become my alpha's force mate. Iris was condemned for showing mercy to a rogue. We found each other here. Found Ember. And she gave us something to believe in again. She's our leader," Iris added quietly. "Not because of rank or bloodline, but because she's earned our loyalty." Thorne absorbed this information silently, his jaw working. I need to sit down, he said suddenly, and without waiting for permission, he sank onto a nearby rock. He looked broken. This powerful Alpha King, reduced to tears in a cave surrounded by exiles and the children he'd never known existed. How, he asked finally, looking up at Ember. How did you forgive me enough to keep them?
To not.
He couldn't finish the sentence. Ember's eyes flashed. You think I kept them for you? You think I carried them and birthed them and loved them as some kind of gift to the man who rejected me? No, I kept them for me, Ember interrupted fiercely. Because they're mine. Because the moment I realized I was pregnant, I knew I would do anything to protect them. Not because they're your heirs. Not because they're Alphaborn. But because they're my children, and I love them more than anything in this world. Her voice softened as she looked down at the twins. They've never asked to be born into this situation. Never asked to have a mother who was rejected and a father who's a king. But I swore the day I found out about them that they would grow up knowing they were wanted.
Loved.
Valued. She looked back at Thorne, her eyes hard. That's something I never had. And I refuse to let them grow up feeling the way I did. Like they weren't good enough. Like they didn't matter. They matter, Thorne said hoarsely. Moon Goddess, they matter more than anything. And so do you, Ember. You've always mattered. Just not enough, Ember finished bitterly. Thorne flinched, but didn't deny it. Nova began to fuss again, and Ember recognized the signs. She needed to feed them, but she wasn't about to do that with Thorne watching. You need to leave, she said firmly. Ember, please. I said leave. The babies need to nurse, and I'm not doing that with you here. Thorne stood immediately. Of course. I'm sorry. Can I come back? Tomorrow? Just to see them again. Ember wanted to say no, wanted to send him back to his kingdom and never see him again. But she looked at Nova's silver eyes and Asher's dark hair, and she knew she couldn't make that choice for them. You can come back, she said finally. But only you. Your pack stays away from here. And you don't get to make demands or try to take them from me. They're not heirs to your throne. They're my children. I understand, Thorne said quickly. I won't try to take them. I just want to know them. To be part of their lives, if you'll let me. We'll see, Ember replied non-committally. Now go. Thorne nodded and turned toward the exit. But at the entrance to the chamber, he paused and looked back. Ember. What? Thank you, he said softly, for keeping them safe, for being strong enough to survive when I tried to break you, and for letting me see them, even though I don't deserve it. Ember said nothing. After a moment, Thorne continued. I know you don't believe me, but I need you to know, rejecting you was the biggest mistake of my life. And if I could go back and change it, I would, in a heartbeat. But you can't, Ember said quietly. So pretty words don't mean much. I know. Thorne's shoulders sagged. But I'll spend the rest of my life proving it anyway. If you'll let me. Then he was gone, his footsteps echoing through the tunnels until silence returned. The moment he left, Ember's legs gave out. She sank onto the furs, clutching her babies close as tears finally fell. That was brave, Iris said softly, sitting beside her. Letting him see them. Was it? Ember whispered. Or was it stupid?
Now he knows about them.
He could come back with an army, take them by force. He won't, Rowan said with surprising certainty. Did you see his face? He's destroyed, Ember. Completely destroyed by what he did to you. Good, Ember said viciously. But even as she spoke, she felt the mate bond pulse weakly in her chest. Her traitorous heart still recognized him. Still wanted him, despite everything. No, she told herself firmly. I won't go back to that. Won't let him hurt me again. She looked down at Asher and Nova, who had begun to root around, searching for milk. Let's get you two fed, she murmured, adjusting her clothing. As the twins nursed, Ember felt some of the tension drain from her body. This was what mattered. Her children. Her pack. The life she'd built from nothing. Thorne could come back tomorrow, could see his children, and feel the weight of what he'd thrown away. But it wouldn't change anything. She was Ember Ashford, leader of the Frostborn pack. And she didn't need a king to complete her. Outside the caves, Thorne stood in the snow, staring at the entrance as if he could see through stone to the family he'd just left behind. Victor approached cautiously. "Your Majesty? Are you all right?" "No," Thorne said honestly. "I'm not." "What did you find in there?" Thorne closed his eyes, and more tears escaped. "My mate. Alive and strong and more beautiful than I remembered. And my children. Twins. A boy and a girl." Victor's eyes widened. "Children? Your Majesty, that changes everything. Those are your heirs. The kingdom." "The kingdom can wait," Thorne interrupted. "Right now, all I care about is fixing what I broke. And I don't know if that's even possible." He looked at his second, and Victor saw something in his king's eyes he'd never seen before. Humility. "I failed her, Victor. I failed my mate in every possible way. And now she's raised my children without me, built a life without me, and she's thriving. She doesn't need me." "Then make her need you," Victor suggested.
"How?"
Thorne asked helplessly. "She has every reason to hate me." "Then give her a reason not to," Victor replied simply. "You're the Alpha King. You have resources she doesn't. Protection, medical supplies, food that isn't hunted in a frozen wasteland. If she won't accept you as a mate, at least be useful as an ally." Thorne considered this. "She's proud. She won't accept charity." "Then don't offer charity. Offer trade. Partnership. Whatever you have to call it to make her agree." A spark of hope ignited in Thorne's chest. "You're right. I can't undo the rejection. But I can show her I've changed. That I'm not the man who threw her away." He looked back at the cave entrance, determination settling over him. "I'm staying," he announced. "Set up camp nearby. We're not leaving until I've earned even the smallest measure of her forgiveness." "The kingdom," Victor began. "The kingdom is in Marcus's capable hands for now," Thorne interrupted. "This is more important, because for the first time since that terrible night at the gala, Thorne had a purpose. A reason to be better. He would win back his mate. Or die trying. Chapter 11. The Slow Thaw. 3 weeks passed in an uneasy dance between the Alpha King's camp and the Frostborn Pack's caves. True to his word, Thorne had established a temporary settlement a respectful distance from Ember's territory. His group, which Ember learned consisted of Victor, his second, Derek, the young guard who'd helped banish her, and 3 other loyal warriors, built sturdy shelters and kept to themselves unless invited. Every morning, Thorne would arrive at the cave entrance alone. And every morning, Ember would debate whether to let him in. But she always did, because despite her anger, despite the walls she'd built around her heart, she couldn't deny her children the chance to know their father. And Thorne was trying. He never pushed, never demanded. He would sit quietly in the corner of the main chamber, watching Asher and Nova with an expression of such profound longing and regret that even Ember's hardened heart ached at the sight. He brought gifts, carefully chosen, never ostentatious. Medical supplies for Iris. Quality furs that were warmer than anything they could hunt. Dried fruits and herbs that didn't grow in the Frostlands. Tools that made their daily survival easier. "It's not charity," he'd insisted the first time Ember had refused. "Consider it payment for letting me see them." Ember had wanted to throw the supplies in his face, but practicality won out. Her pack needed these things, and if the Alpha King wanted to ease his conscience by providing them, who was she to refuse? Still, she kept her distance, kept her guard up, because the moment she let herself soften toward him was the moment she became vulnerable again. And Ember Ashford would never be that vulnerable again. On the morning of the 22nd day, Thorne arrived to find chaos. Asher was screaming, not the normal cry of a hungry baby, but a howl of genuine distress. Ember paced the chamber, her face pale, while Iris examined the infant with worry etched across her features. "What's wrong?" Thorne demanded, his alpha authority bleeding through despite his attempt to stay calm. "Fever," Iris said shortly. "It came on suddenly during the night. Nova's fine, but Asher, his temperature is dangerously high." Thorne's wolf surged forward, protective instincts roaring to life. What can we do? I've tried everything, Iris said, frustration thick in her voice. Cool clothes, fever-reducing herbs. Nothing's working. He needs real medicine. The kind I don't have access to here. Then we'll get it, Thorne said immediately. I'll send Victor back to the Citadel. That's 3 days' journey each way, Ember interrupted, her voice tight with fear. He could die before they get back. Thorne's mind raced. Then an idea struck him. There's an outpost, he said quickly. 2 hours south of here. A border station between the kingdoms. They'll have a healer, supplies, medicine. 2 hours in this weather with a sick infant. Ember's eyes were wild with panic. He'll never survive the journey. He won't survive here either, Thorne said bluntly. Not without medicine. Ember, I know you don't trust me. I know you have every reason not to. But please, let me help. Let me save our son. Our son. The words hung in the air between them. Ember looked down at Asher, whose tiny face was flushed with fever, his breathing rapid and shallow. Every maternal instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong. I'll come with you, she said finally. You can't, Iris protested. You're still recovering from childbirth. The journey. I don't care, Ember cut her off. I'm not letting him out of my sight. If Asher goes, I go. Thorne nodded immediately. Then we leave now. Victor can carry supplies. Derek knows the fastest route. We can make it in under 2 hours if we move quickly. Ember turned to Rowan. You'll stay with Nova? With my life, Rowan swore. And if I'm not back by nightfall. You will be, Thorne interrupted firmly. I swear it, Ember. I will bring you both back safely. Ember wanted to argue, wanted to resist accepting his help. But Asher let out another weak cry, and the decision made itself. Let's go, she said, wrapping her son in the warmest furs they had. The journey south was brutal. Wind tore at them with icy claws. Snow fell so thick it was nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Ember held Asher against her chest, her body wrapped around as to shield him from the worst of the cold. Thorne stayed close, one hand on her back to steady her when she stumbled. His strength was the only thing keeping her upright. Almost there, he murmured as they crested another ridge. I can see the outpost lights. Ember's legs were numb. Her arms ached from holding Asher so tightly, but she pushed forward, driven by a mother's desperate love. They burst through the doors of the outpost in a flurry of snow and panic. We need a healer, Thorne roared, his alpha voice filling the small building. Now! Guards scrambled. A woman in healer's robes rushed forward, her experienced eyes taking in the situation immediately. Bring the child here, she commanded, gesturing to a table near the fire. Ember laid Asher down reluctantly, her hands hovering over him, as if she could protect him through sheer force of will. The healer worked quickly, examining him with gentle efficiency. She pressed herbs to his chest, dripped medicine between his tiny lips, and wrapped him in blankets warmed by heated stones. The fever's high, she said after several tense minutes. But it hasn't turned into an infection yet. The medicine should work quickly for one so young. Should, Ember repeated, her voice breaking. You're not certain? Nothing is certain, child, the healer said kindly. But I've treated many infants with similar symptoms. Most recover fully within a day. Most, Ember whispered. She felt Thorne's hand on her shoulder, warm, steady, grounding. He's strong, Thorne said softly. Like his mother. He'll fight this. Ember wanted to shrug off his touch. Wanted to maintain her distance. But she was so tired, so scared. And his presence, despite everything, was a comfort she couldn't deny. So she let his hand remain. Hours passed in tense waiting. The healer gave Asher another dose of medicine as evening fell. His temperature began to drop slowly, his breathing easing. Ember sat beside the table, refusing to move, one hand resting on her son's tiny chest to feel each breath. Thorne sat on the floor beside her chair, his back against the wall. He didn't try to make conversation, just stayed close, a silent presence in the darkness. Around midnight, Asher's eyes finally opened. They were clear, aware, no longer glazed with fever. He looked at his mother and made a small sound, not distress, just acknowledgement. Ember burst into tears. "Thank the moon goddess," she sobbed, gathering him carefully into her arms. "Thank the goddess, you're all right. You're all right, my warrior. Mama's here. I'm right here." Thorne stood slowly, his own eyes wet. "He's going to be fine." "Yes," Ember agreed, unable to stop crying. "He is." Without thinking, she turned into Thorne's chest, and his arms came around both her and Asher, holding them as carefully as if they were made of glass. For a moment, just a heartbeat, Ember let herself lean into him. Let herself accept the comfort he offered. Let herself remember what it felt like to have someone else share the burden. Then reality crashed back, and she pulled away. "We should stay until morning," Thorne said quietly, pretending not to notice her withdrawal. "Make sure his fever doesn't return. The healer has a room we can use." Ember nodded, too exhausted to argue. They were shown to a small chamber with a bed and a fire. Ember lay down with Asher tucked against her chest, and within moments, exhaustion claimed her. She didn't see Thorne settle onto the floor beside the bed. Didn't see him watch over both of them through the night, his amber eyes never leaving their faces. Didn't see the tears that fell as he realized what he'd almost lost, what he'd thrown away, and what he would do anything to earn back. They returned to the caves the next afternoon. Asher's fever was completely gone, his strength already returning. By the time they arrived, he was nursing hungrily, his small fists gripping Ember's clothing with reassuring force. Nova squealed when she saw her brother, her tiny face scrunching with what might have been relief. The reunion between the twins made everyone in the chamber smile despite the tension. "You saved him," Ember said to Thorne as she settled both babies for a nap. "If you had known about the outpost, if you hadn't gotten us there so quickly..." She couldn't finish the sentence. "He's my son," Thorne said simply. "I would have done anything." "I know," Ember admitted quietly. "And thank you. Truly." It was the first time she'd thanked him for anything. The first crack in the ice that had formed around her heart. Thorne saw it, recognized it, and was wise enough not to push. "Get some rest," he said instead. "You're exhausted. I'll stay if you want, or I can go if you'd prefer." "Stay," Ember said before she could stop herself.
Just for a little while.
"In case the fever comes back." It was an excuse, and they both knew it. But Thorne nodded and settled into his usual corner. And as Ember drifted off to sleep, surrounded by her children and her pack, for the first time since the rejection, she didn't dream of betrayal. She dreamed of what might have been, and what, maybe, impossibly, might still be. The next morning, Ember woke to find Thorne gone. But in his place was a small wooden carving, a wolf, delicately crafted, with two tiny pups at its feet. Underneath, scratched into the base, were 3 words. "Never stop fighting." Ember stared at the carving for a long moment, her fingers tracing the smooth wood. Something was changing between them. Something slow and terrifying and inevitable. The ice around her heart was beginning to thaw, and she didn't know if she was ready for what that meant. But as she looked at her sleeping children, alive and healthy because their father had saved them, Ember couldn't deny one simple truth. Thorne Ironwood was trying. Really, genuinely trying. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start building something new. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But a beginning. Over the following days, the dynamic shifted. Thorne still came every morning. But now, instead of sitting silently in the corner, he began to help. He learned to change the twins' cloth diapers without flinching. Figured out how to soothe Asher when he was fussy by walking in slow circles while humming low in his chest. Discovered that Nova loved being held up high where she could see everything. He listened to Marcus's stories of the old pack ways. Helped Cole reinforce their food storage. Even managed to make Rowan laugh with a self-deprecating story about his first attempt at hunting as a young wolf. Slowly, impossibly, he became part of the daily rhythm of the Frostborn pack. And Ember watched him with their children. watched him earn the respect of her pack, watched him prove, day by day, that he wasn't the same man who had rejected her. "He's different here," Iris observed one evening as they prepared dinner. "Away from the citadel and the politics. He's just himself." "Maybe," Ember said noncommittally. But she'd noticed it too. The way his shoulders relaxed when he held the twins. The genuine smile that appeared when Nova gripped his finger. The softness in his eyes when he looked at Ember. Not with desire or possession, but with something deeper. Regret. Admiration. Hope. "He loves them," Rowan said simply. "And I think he loves you too, even if he can't say it yet." "Love isn't enough," Ember replied. "Not after what he did." "Maybe not," Iris agreed. "But it's a start." Ember didn't respond, because deep down, in a place she didn't want to acknowledge, she was starting to wonder the same thing. Was love enough? Could it ever be enough to heal what had been broken? She didn't have an answer, but she was beginning to think she might want to find out. Chapter 12. Redemption and Rebirth. 6 weeks after Thorne's arrival in the Frostlands, everything changed. The morning started normally. Thorne arrived at dawn as usual, bringing fresh supplies and wearing the cautious hope that had become his permanent expression. Ember was nursing the twins when he entered, and she no longer bothered to hide or feel self-conscious. They'd crossed that bridge weeks ago, settling into an unexpected domesticity that felt both natural and terrifying. "Good morning," Thorne said softly, setting down a bundle near the fire. "Morning," Ember replied. "What did you bring today?" "Winter berries from the southern slopes." Victor found a patch growing near the outpost. He paused. "And a letter from the citadel." Ember's head snapped up. "What kind of letter?" Thorne's jaw tightened. "From the council. They're demanding I return. There's been unrest. Morgana has been consolidating power in my absence, making alliances I never authorized, changing laws." "So you're leaving," Ember said flatly, hating the way her stomach dropped at the thought. "No," Thorne said immediately. "Not without you. Not without the twins." "Thorne, hear me out, please." He moved closer, kneeling beside where she sat so their eyes were level. "I know I have no right to ask this. I know I've done nothing to earn your trust or forgiveness. But Ember, come back with me. Bring the twins. Bring your whole pack if you want." "Why would I do that?" Ember asked, though her voice was less hostile than it would have been weeks ago. "Because Morgana is dangerous," Thorne said urgently. "The reports Victor has been sending back, she's been spreading lies about you, telling the kingdom you died in the Frostlands, claiming the twins don't exist. She's erasing you from history, Ember." Ember's blood ran cold. Why would she do that? Because she knows if the kingdom learns the truth, that I have legitimate heirs, that my fated mate is alive, her position becomes worthless. She'd lose everything she's schemed to gain. He reached out slowly, carefully, and placed his hand over hers where it rested on Nova's back. "She needs to be stopped. And I can't do it without you. The mate bond might be severed, but the kingdom knows the moon goddess chose you. If you stand beside me, if the people see our children, Morgana's lies will crumble." "You want to use me," Ember said, but there was no heat in it. Just a tired understanding. "I want to give you what you should have had from the beginning," Thorne corrected. "Recognition. Power. A voice. You've built something incredible here, Ember. A pack based on loyalty and choice rather than hierarchy and fear. The kingdoms need that vision. They need you." "The kingdoms threw me away," Ember reminded him. "I threw you away," Thorne said, and the raw pain in his voice made her chest ache. "And it's the biggest regret of my life. But you're not the same woman I rejected. You're stronger now. Fiercer. You've proven that an Omega can survive what would kill most alphas. That leadership isn't about rank, but about courage." He squeezed her hand gently. "Come back with me. Not as my Luna, I know I haven't earned that, but as yourself. As the mother of my children and the leader of the Frostborn pack. Show the kingdoms what they tried to destroy." Ember was silent for a long moment, looking down at her children. Asher had fallen asleep nursing, his small mouth still against her breast. Nova's silver eyes were wide and alert, watching the adults with uncanny intelligence. "What about my pack?" she asked finally. "The ones who saved me when you tried to kill me?" "They come with us," Thorne said immediately. "Full pardons for everyone. Marcus can have his beta position back if he wants it, or he can serve as your second. The others get land, resources, whatever they need to build new lives." "And if I say no?" Ember challenged. "If I choose to stay here with my children and my pack?" Pain flashed across Thorne's face. "Then I abdicate the throne and stay with you. Because I've learned something these past weeks, Ember. I've learned that titles and kingdoms mean nothing without the people you love beside you." Ember's breath caught. "You'd give up your throne? For me?"
For you.
"For them." Thorne looked at the twins with such profound love it made Ember's heart ache. "For the family I threw away and somehow, impossibly, have been given a second chance to know." "You said love," Ember whispered. Do you love me, Thorne?" He met her eyes, and what she saw there nearly broke her. "I loved you the moment the mate bond snapped into place," he said hoarsely. "And I've loved you every day since, even when I was too much of a coward to admit it. Even when I chose politics over destiny. My wolf has never accepted anyone else. Has never stopped calling for you." Tears pricked Ember's eyes. "You rejected me. I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life atoning for it if you let me. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Ember. I know I don't deserve it. But I'm asking for a chance. One chance to prove that I've changed. That I can be the mate you deserved from the beginning." Ember looked at him. Really looked at him. The dark circles under his eyes from weeks of sleeping on hard ground. At the calluses on his hands from helping with camp work. At the way he looked at their children with such fierce devotion. He had changed. Not completely. Not perfectly. But enough. "I need to think," she said finally. "And I need to talk to my pack. This isn't just my decision." "Of course," Thorne agreed immediately. "Take all the time you need." But before he could stand, Ember reached out and caught his hand. "Thorne, yes. Thank you. For saving Asher. For respecting my boundaries. For trying." His eyes filled with tears. "It's the least I could do." After Thorne left, Ember called the Frostborn pack together. They gathered in the main chamber, Marcus, Iris, Rowan, Cole, and half a dozen others who had found their way to the pack over the past weeks. Ember explained everything. Thorne's offer. Morgana's schemes. The choice they faced. "I won't order you to come," she said firmly. "This pack has always been about choice. If you want to stay here, we stay. If you want to go, we go. But we decided together." Marcus spoke first. "I say we go. Morgana needs to be stopped. And the kingdoms need to see what we've built here, that there's another way to live." "Agreed," Iris said. "Besides, I'm tired of treating patients in caves. A proper infirmary would be nice." Rowan grinned. "I want to see the look on your alpha's face when you walk back into that citadel with your children and your pack at your back. The man who tried to break you, forced you to watch him rise." One by one, the others voiced their agreement. Cole was the last to speak. "You saved us, Ember. Gave us purpose when we thought we had none. If you say we go back and face those bastards who threw us away, then we go. Together." Ember felt tears well up. "You're sure? Once we do this, there's no going back. We'll be entering the kingdom's politics. The danger, the intrigue." "We've survived the Frostlands," Marcus interrupted. "We can survive anything. The Frostborn pack stands together," Iris declared. "Always." The others held their agreement, the sound echoing through the caves. Ember looked at her family, chosen, not born, and felt something fierce and protective surge through her. "Then we go," she said. "But we go on our terms. We're not begging for acceptance. We're demanding the recognition we deserve." "Now that," Rowan said with a feral grin, "sounds like the Ember I know." 1 week later, a procession unlike any the northern kingdoms had ever seen approached the Ironwood citadel. At its head walked Alpha King Thorne Ironwood, his formal attire replaced by the practical furs and leather of the Frostlands. Beside him walked Ember Ashford, dressed in a magnificent cloak made from white wolf fur, her copper-red hair braided with silver thread. She carried Nova against her chest in a specially designed sling, while Thorne held Asher with the careful reverence of a man holding the most precious thing in the world. Behind them marched the Frostborn pack, 15 strong now, having collected more exiles on their journey south. They moved with the confidence of wolves who had survived the unsurvivable. The citadel gates opened slowly, and crowds gathered to stare. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Is that the Omega? She's alive? Those babies, are those the Alpha King's children? Look at her. She looks like a queen." Morgana stood on the palace steps, her face a mask of shock and fury. The council flanked her, their expressions ranging from confusion to awe. Thorne and Ember climbed the steps together, their pack arrayed behind them like an honor guard. "Impossible," Morgana hissed. "You're supposed to be dead." "Clearly I'm not," Ember replied coolly. "Sorry to disappoint." She turned to face the gathered crowd, her voice carrying with unexpected power. "My name is Ember Ashford. I am the Alpha King's fated mate, rejected and banished to die in the Frostlands. But I did not die. I survived. And I have returned with our children, the legitimate heirs to the Ironwood throne." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ember held up Nova for all to see. "This is Nova Ironwood. And this." She gestured to Asher in Thorne's arms. "This is Asher Ironwood. They are Alpha-born twins, children of the mate bond blessed by the moon goddess herself." Morgana's face had gone pale. "This is a trick. Some kind of—" "DNA can be verified," Ember interrupted. "But anyone with eyes can see they carry their father's bloodline. Asher has his amber eyes. Nova has his silver ones. They radiate alpha power even as infants." She turned to Thorne. "Your Majesty, would you like to explain to your kingdom why you rejected your fated mate and condemned your own children to death before they were even born?" Thorne stepped forward, his voice heavy with regret. "I was manipulated," he said clearly. "Fed false visions by witches in Lady Morgana's employ. I was told my mate would bring ruin to the kingdom, and in my fear, I made the worst decision of my life." He looked at Ember, and the love in his eyes was unmistakable. "But my mate did not bring ruin. She brought strength, leadership, hope. She survived what would have killed anyone else. Built a pack from exiles and forgotten wolves. Gave birth to our children in the frozen north and raised them with nothing but her courage and determination." He turned back to the crowd. "I was wrong. And Lady Morgana Silverclaw has spent my absence consolidating power based on lies. She told you Ember was dead, that no children existed. She sought to erase the truth, so she could keep a throne that was never rightfully hers." "You're mad," Morgana shrieked. "The council supports me. The kingdom follows the moon goddess's will," Thorne interrupted. "And she chose Ember, not you." He looked at Ember, and slowly, in front of the entire kingdom, the Alpha King dropped to one knee. "Ember Ashford, I rejected you once. It's a mistake I'll regret until my dying breath. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I can never undo the pain I caused. But I'm asking, begging, for a second chance." His voice broke. "Not because of politics or heirs or power, but because you're my mate, the other half of my soul. And I love you. I've always loved you, even when I was too much of a fool to say it." The crowd was silent, holding its collective breath. Ember looked down at the man kneeling before her, this powerful Alpha King, humbling himself in front of his entire kingdom. And she thought about the journey that had brought them here. The rejection, the survival, the slow rebuilding of trust, the way he looked at their children, the way he'd learned to respect her strength rather than diminish it. He wasn't perfect. He'd hurt her in ways that would take years to fully heal. But he was trying, genuinely, desperately trying. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. "Stand up, Thorne," she said softly. He rose slowly, hope and fear warring in his eyes. Ember shifted Nova in her arms and reached out, placing one hand against his chest where the severed mate bond still ached. "I won't lie and say I've forgiven you completely," she said. "What you did, it broke something in me that will take time to repair. Maybe it will never be fully whole again." Thorne's face crumpled, but she continued. "But I've also seen who you can be, who you are when you're not hiding behind a crown and protocols. You saved our son's life. You've respected my choices. You've loved our children without demanding anything in return." She took a deep breath. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to formally denounce Morgana, expose her schemes, and then you're going to reform the kingdom's laws, starting with protections for Omegas and an end to rank-based discrimination." "Done," Thorne said immediately. "Anything else?" "Yes." Ember's voice grew stronger. "The Frostborn pack becomes an official pack under your protection. Marcus will be reinstated as a beta. The others will receive full pardons and land to build a settlement. And I—" She paused, meeting his eyes. "I will stand beside you, not as a trophy Luna who smiles and stays silent, but as your equal, your partner, someone who challenges you and pushes you to be better." "Yes," Thorne breathed. "Yes to all of it." "I'm not finished," Ember said. "The mate bond was severed. I won't pretend it wasn't. But if you're willing to try, we could build something new. Not based on fate or destiny, but on choice. On the life we create together." Tears streamed down Thorne's face. "I would be honored." Ember looked at her children, then at her pack, then back at Thorne. "Then let's begin again. Not as Alpha King and rejected Omega, but as Thorne and Ember. Two wolves trying to build something better." She held out her hand. Thorne took it, and the moment their skin touched, both gasped. The severed mate bond, that broken thread they'd both felt aching in their chests, suddenly flared to life. Not the same as before. This was different. Stronger. Built not on the moon goddess's mandate, but on their own choice to try. The crowd erupted in cheers. Morgana screamed in fury, but guards were already restraining her, dragging her away to face justice for her crimes. And Ember Ashford, the Omega who was supposed to die forgotten in the snow, stood on the steps of the Ironwood Citadel with her mate, her children, and her pack. Not as a victim, but as a queen. 6 months later, the Frostborn settlement rose from the southern edge of the Ironwood territory like a promise fulfilled. Houses built from stone and timber. A central hall where wolves of all ranks gathered as equals. Training grounds where Omegas learned to fight alongside Alphas. A school where children were taught that strength came in many forms. It was everything Ember had dreamed of during those dark nights in the Frostlands. She stood at the entrance to the settlement, Asher and Nova, now walking and getting into everything, playing at her feet. Both children had grown strong and healthy, their alpha power evident in every movement. Thorne appeared beside her, slipping an arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "How far we've come," Ember replied. "How different everything is." "Better?" "Different," she repeated. Then, after a pause, "But yes, better." The mate bond hummed between them, not the overwhelming force it had been before the rejection, but something steadier. Something they'd chosen to rebuild, piece by careful piece. They weren't perfect. They still fought sometimes, still struggled with trust and old wounds. But they were trying, and that Ember had learned was enough. "The council approved your proposal," Thorne said. "Starting next month, rank-based discrimination will be illegal throughout all the northern kingdoms. Omegas will have the same rights and protections as any other wolf." Ember smiled. "It's a start, thanks to you." He pulled her closer. "You've changed everything, Ember. The entire kingdom is different because you refuse to stay broken." "We changed it," she corrected. "Together." She looked at her children, at the settlement her pack had built, at the mate who had learned to see her as an equal. The rejected Omega was gone. In her place stood a queen, not because of a crown or a title, but because she'd earned it through survival, courage, and an unbreakable will. "Mama," Nova called, holding up a flower she'd found. "Pretty. Very pretty little star," Ember agreed, kneeling to admire it. Asher immediately tried to grab it from his sister, and soon both children were wrestling in the grass, laughing. Thorne watched them with such profound love it made Ember's chest ache. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly. "I know I've said it before, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry for what I put you through, for not being strong enough to trust the bond, for hurting you." Ember straightened and cupped his face in her hands. "I know," she said softly, "and I'm working on forgiving you. It takes time. But Thorne, I need you to know something." "What?" "If you hadn't rejected me, I would never have become this person. Never have built the Frostborn pack. Never have learned how strong I really am." She smiled. "So, in a strange way, your worst mistake gave me my greatest gifts." "No," Ember agreed. "But it makes it bearable. And it makes what we have now more precious. Because we chose this. Choose each other. Not because fate demanded it, but because we wanted to." She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they pulled apart, both children were staring at them with matching expressions of disgust. "Yucky," Asher declared. "So yucky," Nova agreed. Ember and Thorne laughed, the sound carrying across the settlement. And as the sun set over the Frostborn territory, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Ember Ashford, Luna Queen, pack leader, survivor, felt something she'd never thought possible. Complete peace. She'd been rejected, broken, and left to die. But she'd risen from the ashes stronger than anyone could have imagined. And in the end, that was the greatest revenge of all. Not destruction, but living well, living fully, living as proof that no one, no Alpha King, no hierarchy, no cruel world could define her worth. Only she could do that. And she had decided she was worth everything. The end. Big thanks for listening. Did you have a favorite scene or a line? Share it in the comments. I can't wait to read them.